I like your logo, by the way.
Thank you. We love it too.
Who did it for you?
It was a designer from Etsy. We told them, hey, here's a couple old cigar labels. Use this as inspiration. You know, you got to have a cigar. There needs to be a rooster in there. Here's the gates of Ybor, and they cooked that up. We love it. We've had it since kind of the beginning, really. All right, welcome everyone to the TBD Pod. Today we have Tampa City Councilman Bill Carlson. Welcome to the show, Bill.
Hey, thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely.
Glad to be on the show.
You were just getting into something. What were you saying?
I was looking at your logo, and I was talking about Ybor City.
Yeah.
And so my company, I have a PR firm. We were in downtown for 30 years, and we're still supporters of downtown. But I saw what was about to happen in Ybor City, and that Ybor City was becoming the cultural, creative, innovation center of the region, really. And I decided to move my company to Ybor City. When I got to Ybor City, I started looking at the icons of Ybor City, and the natural one is to use the rooster. You never really understand a culture until you start to ask people who are there. And it turns out that the residents of Ybor, now it's not the people who had lived there in the 50s, now they're new residents,
Yeah.
but they are the Ybor City residents. They strongly object to the rooster as a symbol.
Huh.
And the reason is they don't like to have the roosters wake them up in the morning.
Yeah. Yeah, they're a little biased, right? That we don't have to deal, if you don't live in Ybor, you don't have to deal with the cock-a-doodle-doo in the morning.
So it's like when I lived in Asia, I could always tell when an art director had just moved from the US or UK because they would put chopsticks in their ads or some other icon of Chinese or Asian culture. Sometimes they would put fortune cookies, which weren't even invented in Asia. They were invented in San Francisco. And it's the same thing here with the rooster in Ybor City. I'm trying to still learn 4 years later the different aspects of culture in Ybor and how people think about Ybor.
Well, the roosters, all the chickens in Ybor are the descendants of the chickens that people kept like over 100 years ago when those immigrants first came to Ybor City.
Well, there are people that love the chickens. There are protection societies. There's a group that helps injured chickens. In Jose Marti Park, which is behind my office, there's a family where there are like 5 chickies that have been born, and my staff watch them every day to make sure they're safe. And they've named them, and they take videos of them.
People are passionate. People are very protective of those little creatures.
So the chickens definitely are, and the roosters are an icon of Ybor, and they're important historically. But it's just interesting. You have to know how different audiences within a culture react to different symbols.
Well, everyone has different opinions on everything, right? That's kind of the beautiful thing about this country is people can make their voice heard and argue, and there's debate and dialogue, and eventually there's a solution. And in the city of Tampa, aren't the chickens protected in some way? Like there's an official city code.
In Ybor, at least. I'm not sure about the rest of the city.
And do you know what exactly they're protected on? Like you can't harm them, you can't mess with them. Essentially,
I don't know.
What it is?
I don't remember exactly.
In Ybor City,
you definitely can't kill them. I don't think you're allowed to scare them, maybe even. But think about when you're looking at the culture of a community, how do you approach development or redevelopment in a sensitive way?
Yeah.
So Ybor City is a historic district. Many of the old buildings have been torn down, and Daryl Shaw rolls in. He did a smart thing, and I'm a big fan of his. I think he has a great vision. He, he bought his first building in like 1988, and then it fell down. And so he went into business with his brother, made a lot of money, and came back. Now he's implementing his vision. So he has this long history with Ybor. And he got the right people. He got the Capitanos, the Bookmans, and others, the Guayardos to support him. So he became partners with many of the old families that were in Ybor, and they put their assets together. They started buying land, but then you have to figure out, what do we do with it? You could build shiny, new style office buildings, but instead he worked to try to build buildings that were like what Ybor might have been like at the turn of the century 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And the one he's just done on the corner of Nuccio and 7th, when it's finished, I think it's almost finished. When it's finished, the bricks and everything, it will look like it's 140 years old.
You're talking about Casa Marti and Casa Gomez.
Yeah, and the other thing he did is he named he has a business partner named Ariel, who's a Cuban American,
right?
And he's a fan of Cuban history, and the history of Cuba and Tampa, Ybor are intertwined. We say the kids of Tampa grow up learning the history of Cuba, and the kids in Cuba grow up learning the history of Tampa. And so Ariel has come up with a whole naming system where the buildings are named after famous Cuban figures.
Right. Yeah, Marti and Gomez were two of the figures. Pedroso. Yeah, I've heard a lot about Ariel. I'd love to reach out to him and get him on the show.
Do you know that nobody will be able to see this, but when you talk about the history of Tampa, the logo.
Show it here. I'll put it in the camera right here.
The logo of Tampa, I have that on my city phone, so I remember which one it is. But the logo of Tampa has Cuba in it. That's how important. Do you know what that is?
That's the mascot. That was a ship, right? Henry Plant's ship.
So this is one of the steamships, and it's not an actual depiction of the real ship, but this is representative of a steamship that used to go back and forth to Cuba. We had regular service from Tampa to Cuba back in the 1890s. And if you were from New York or somewhere in the north and you wanted to go to Cuba, you would have to take the train to Tampa, and then you would take the steamship. That's why Teddy Roosevelt and the others came here. And so because of that, a who's who of everybody came through Tampa. But the other thing is that we think that the history of the U.S. and Cuba is in Miami, but it's not. It's in Tampa.
Right.
We were the center of trade with Cuba in the United States when Miami was a little fishing village. There was nothing there. And do you know when Ponce de Leon landed, 1513, he landed somewhere on the East Coast, like St. Augustine or Melbourne. Do you know where he sailed from?
From Spain, you're saying, or from where?
He was the governor of Puerto Rico. So he was exploring the Northern Territories, and we know there were other explorations, and for sure the indigenous people went back and forth. But he sailed from Puerto Rico to what's now the United States. He put the flag down somewhere on the east coast of the United States. Do you know where the first ship that left Cuba and landed in the United States? Where did it land?
I'm gonna guess Tampa, Florida.
One more guess.
St. Augustine. Where?
St. Petersburg.
St. Petersburg.
So there's an area called Coffee Pot Bayou, and the way that they know that it's there is that there's an Indian burial mound, and we know from the records of this the Narvaez expedition. If you go to the History Center, you can see the video about this. That they took over an American Indian camp and settled there. They didn't stay very long, and most of them were ultimately killed. But anyway, the first recorded ship that left Cuba and landed in what's now the United States landed in the Tampa Bay area was in St. Pete, not Tampa.
Yeah. Wow. That's wild. I didn't know that. That's all this history and some of those cultural connections are so important moving forward in the way our city grows and development. I love how you connected. It all starts with culture, right? Think if Daryl came here, bought a bunch of land, didn't want to talk to anyone about his plans and wanted to do some sort of modern vision that was completely outside of the respect of the history of our city. Many people would be against it. People would be rallying, and they would be in the city council meetings talking about, we don't want this man to come in here and turn this place into Miami, right? Or whatever they would say. It all starts with culture. It's what makes a place unique and special.
So here's a challenge for you. The one of the projects that Daryl worked on with his partners was Haya Hotel, again named after, in this case, a historic Ybor resident. It's Carlos Alfonso and his brother designed it, so it's got some modern, some classic in it. Across the street from it is the old Blue Ribbon supermarket that burned down years ago. The Accardi brothers own that. It's just an empty lot with parking on it. You could kind of say that Haya is now the center of gravity of Ybor. But the space across the street is probably the most important space in Ybor right now. It's the biggest piece of land on 7th that hasn't been developed. It's across from the epicenter of what's happening. So here's the question. Historically, you could rebuild the Blue Ribbon. But if you look at pictures, would you rebuild it like that? It looked like kind of an ordinary grocery store. Or would you build something iconic like what Daryl has built in the corner?
Try to pull that up, David. Could you type in Blue Ribbon Grocery Ybor, just so I can see the building? And Bill, I'm imagining what? It's like a 1 or 2 story building with big glass fronts, like your old kind of old world 1 story. Yeah, so Haya, so the big parking lot directly north of the train track. So you're going to go on that main street, the east to west street. Right there to the right of your cursor. Yeah, so that's Hotel Haya. So put the little man on the street south, right there. Put that little man right there. Let's see what we can see. So this is the lot. That's the lot to the right. No,
now you're still at Hampton Inn. While he's doing that, you think about the Hampton Inn is another example. There's there's a brick texture to it, so it fits within the overall design. But the new buildings that Daryl's built, you can see those up on that corner. Those buildings, when they're done and they've aged a little bit, are going to look like they're 140 years old.
That was Chansey Architecture did the architecture on that building and the interior designs. And I spoke to them about, there's a reason behind those designs, and they work with the Barrio Latino Commission on, ensuring that it looked like old Ybor, even down to the bricks, right? They didn't just get regular red bricks. They're curating real antique bricks made to look like they've been there 100 years. And 100 years from now, people are not going to be able to describe, hey, that's a newer building. It'll just look like the rest of historic Ybor. So this is the lot we're talking about.
By the way, have you been to Williamsburg?
Virginia? No, I don't think so.
You have to take your son to Williamsburg. But Williamsburg
really
is you could say, the first capital of the United States. It was the Virginia colony. They treat it like a tourist attraction. So they block it off and they ticket it, and it's all themed on the inside. So it is like everyone there dresses in period. But that is where Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, a lot of the famous people in American history got their start. That was developed by, I think it was John D. Rockefeller or his son, I can't remember which. But in 1920s, they went in there were a bunch of derelict buildings. They bought up everything that was left, and then they rebuilt, based on old drawings, they rebuilt the buildings that were gone. Guess what? You haven't been there, but this is one of the most important historic communities in American history.
We'll pop up a Google image so I can see this place.
And we'll jump back here too.
For sure.
But
what's it called? Williamsburg, Virginia. So they rebuilt what was torn down.
Yeah, and they built it based on old drawings and paintings. You think about today, we have pictures and architectural drawings. Sometimes we have architectural drawings.
Oh, beautiful!
But
wow.
Look at this. The brick building here is I think the governor.
It looks like colonial America. It's traditional red brick and the pitched roofs. It's really beautiful.
So, and this goes on for blocks and blocks and blocks. The point I was making is that if you go there, you will swear that all these buildings are 200-300 years old. 90% of them were built in the 1920s.
Here's the challenge and the kind of argument that developers sometimes make, right? When they're forced by local government to adhere to a certain look, is that it's insanely expensive. It's much more expensive to do this type of look and to go back and to try to appreciate the old architecture versus using the cheapest and easiest materials available to them, right? So developers are cautious when they see historic district. It's kind of a red flag, like, ooh, I don't want to mess with that.
Well, this is a tourist attraction. So this one was built with a foundation with Rockefeller money to recreate colonial Williamsburg. And the point I was making is that now those buildings that were built in the 1920s, they're 100 years old. So they still look old, even though they're relatively new.
It's fabulous, and I hope the same for Ybor.
St. Augustine is an example. Oldest continuously occupied European settlement in the United States. But in areas there, they've built buildings that are reflective of the historic buildings. For example, on the waterfront, there's a Hilton Hotel that was built about 20 years ago. From the outside, it looks like a series of colonial buildings.
Yeah.
When you get on the inside they're all connected in a corridor, and it's all actually a couple buildings that are a normal hotel on the inside.
What can the city of Tampa do to help the private sector to get stuff like that done? I mean, obviously there's rules in place, right? The Barrio Latino Commission is essentially the historic district's block to anything crazy or modern going on in Ybor, right?
But that's where I think it has to be more peer pressure and vision or ambition than regulation.
Oh, I like that a lot.
Go back. Can you go back to that empty lot of the blue ribbon? So right now the Acardis, and you can see their sign there. They have it as a parking lot, and they presumably make a lot of money. Go back the other way and look.
Yeah, and you better pay that freaking ticket too, because they'll write you up real quick.
So the brand new Hyatt Hotel is on the other side. That's a meeting space. That's to the right is Los Navidades, the old restaurant, and it used to be a series of bars that a bunch of us went to a long time ago. But if you go back to the blue ribbon, there's it's just a blank space,
right?
And And the idea is, what would you do there? Would you build just a box building? If you were building it historically, you'd build it to look like the Blue Ribbon, and you could Google Blue Ribbon and show what it looked like. But you see behind it, when your grandfather was mayor, Saul Fleshman worked with Ybor City to build 3 parking garages. 2 of them were built on HCC property. This is the third one. This one is connected or for Central Ybor, which is a couple blocks away. Could you go back to that just for 1 second? Sorry. Look at the last 2 floors there. You see how it's just plain concrete?
Yeah, it looks like shit.
So the barrio, what Saul wanted to do is paint them blue and white so they would blend in with the sky.
Okay.
And because the barrio would not let him take brick all the way to the top, but they wouldn't let him do that.
Now, why wouldn't they let you take brick all the way to the top? Wouldn't that be more historic looking to have more brick?
You have to ask him. It doesn't make sense. It should have been, but that is an example of how we should have. I was not on council then. We should have blended better to make that work better.
For sure. Well, I think, first of all, this parking lot here in the Acardis have an incredible opportunity to do something super significant. I mean, if you could zoom out from this view and just show the aerial of this spot, it's a huge piece of property right on 7th, basically in like the center of Ybor City. Obviously, it's on the west side, but you're right across the street from Hyatt.
Yeah, there you go. Now you can see the scale.
Look at that.
Now, Daryl's spoken to them. I've spoken to them. Other people have spoken to them. And the Acardis business is parking. Right. So you understand they want to keep it as parking. It's hard to get permitted for more parking. But of all the properties they own, and they own a lot in Tampa, they have 2 iconic properties, that one and the old Moss Brothers lot in downtown. And if I was ever going to push to have somebody develop something, and I think they get hit a lot for different reasons, but I think they have a vision and a sensitivity to old Tampa. And if we could inspire them in the right way, I think they could build something really iconic there.
I think they could too. And putting them aside, right, not to focus on them in general, how do you think, like, relating it to the parking garage, right, with those 2 floors of concrete, clearly that was probably short-sighted. That either should have been brick, or I like your idea, making it blue to look like the sky, making it blend in. But on the Accardi property and on all these other lots around Ybor, how does the city incentivize and maximize development, but also at the same time ensure that it looks and respects that old history and old culture? The last thing I think anyone wants, I'm sure there's a few select people, but the last thing anyone wants is to turn Ybor into something it's not. Like Ybor, you're right about Ybor being the cultural heart of the city. It really is. There's artisans there, and there's like this artsy kind of thing going on, and the Tampa food scene, and there's energy there. It's a really, really cool cultural area. We don't want to lose that with a bunch of shitty apartments and gross modern looking buildings. We want to kind of keep that culture. So what can be done? Is it a code thing? You mentioned, I like the public peer pressure. I love the idea of the community themselves holding a high standard for a neighborhood.
Well, also looking at projects that have been built. For example, the Casper family building Oxford Exchange.
Yeah.
They set a new standard of quality. And Oxford was built in historic property. Part of it used to be horse stables for the Tampa Bay Hotel. But they built it in a new way that's very high quality. It's built to last for 200 or 300 years.
Yeah.
And it's now an icon of Tampa. And what they proved is that if you spend extra money, you can get a return on it. And so what we need to do is try to inspire. We can try to regulate, but developers, if they don't want to do something, will always find a way out of regulation. What we need to do instead is inspire them and get their peers as they start to hire lawyers, architects, accountants, and others in our community, get them to tell them, hey, you would be a lot better off if you built something that mixed in with the community. You can't do like Williamsburg and build exactly what was there, but we can build something that is developing the new Ybor. And what Daryl and his partners are sensitive to is in the 50s, until the 50s and 60s, Ybor was a community.
Uh-huh.
You know, it had several different thriving ethnic groups there. We're not going to bring all those families back and replace it exactly. We're not going to build Greco hardware store, maybe unless you open it. But there are we're going to turn Ybor into a community again. Thousands of people are going to move there. This space to the left, it was privately owned affordable housing. And so the private owners decided to sell it. And so now Daryl, the part to the north is not sold yet, But the part to the south, Daryl and his partners are building new buildings there, and they're putting a big chunk of affordable housing in there. But what they're going to do is build housing where that dirt is turned. They're going to build housing that looks more like Ybor City. But as they go further south, it's going to get higher in elevation and it's going to get more modern. So they'll do a transition all the way up to Channel District and downtown.
Well, your example about me, one day bringing back Greco hardware, I think it's a good example. And the reason I bring it up is I would love to do that. But unfortunately, the prices are so expensive, it doesn't make economical sense for me or really for anyone to buy that building from that guy who might sell it for the right price. And it's obviously appreciated in value, good for him and all that. But you'd have to overspend an incredible amount on some of these buildings and put a lot of money into them. They're historic, they're old, they don't have, modern electrical connections and all. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. The economics of today are so different from the time when Ybor was developed. It's like how through either government incentive, regulation, and I love your answer, it almost is like a political philosophy to say developers, if pressured by the public and inspired themselves, will do the right thing, will go for quality, will build something significant. My question to you would be, where is your balance personally, right? You're a local politician, you're on Tampa City Council. How do you ensure developers build quality? Because we know there's developers across the board. Some developers are penny pinchers and only going for a dollar metric and a bottom line and are going to build what's necessary for a return. And then there's other developers like Blake Casper you mentioned and their whole team who's done an incredible job of almost not focusing on that bottom line. They're focused on experience and quality. The touch and the feel and the materials in that space are so far beyond anywhere else. So it's like, can government solely be the one to ensure that every developer in a city does that? Or do you have to lean on the public to make those decisions for themselves?
Well, there are state and local regulations for fire hazard and
Right.
other things. And in an area like Ybor City, there's also the barrio, which will approve a certain aesthetics. Same thing in Hyde Park. There's
Yeah.
an architectural review commission. I think that in certain areas there will be specific guidelines, and then in other areas we can try to have influence. We're not going to be able to control 100%. Somebody might build something that's not that great, but what we can do is try to encourage the gatekeepers, the people, especially for investors who are moving from out of town, to make sure the architects, the engineers, and others say, hey, wait a minute, the neighborhood you're going into, they might not have regulation, or they might have limited regulation, but you really need to be sensitive to the culture because it will be easier for you to get approval.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing the city can do is provide amenities that connect to all of this. So in your grandfather's administration, they brought back the streetcar. Can you go up just a little bit? The other way, sorry. So we have Ybor being redeveloped. We have Central Avenue area and Encore there to the left. To the right where that dot is, we have the Channel District, and then Daryl and his partners have a project that will go there at the top of the wharf. And then to the left at the bottom, we have downtown. And so in the middle of that, go back up, in the middle of it,
We need a laser pointer.
yeah, there's a white building right here. And that is, if my location is right,
You're right. Yeah.
that is Tampa Union Station.
Yep.
So it's a historic building that I'm not mentioning this on purpose, but it happened to be restored during your grandfather's administration. 1994, a group of volunteers got together, restored the building. They helped reestablish Amtrak service. Now we have 2 services there. And now it needs to be rebuilt. So through the CRA, we're providing money to, it's the city, the city owns the building, but we're providing money to upgrade and protect the building again, because it's been 30 years. But the other thing is we're proposing putting a co-work space and coffee shop in there. I went with the Tampa Chamber to Denver a few years ago, and their Denver Union Station is bigger than ours. But on the inside of it, you have entrepreneurs working on desks everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So why not, when people arrive by train at the train station, why not have them pull into a place with a nice coffee shop, free Wi-Fi, and entrepreneurs in Tampa busily creating new businesses.
Well, why not expand it though, too? I mean, you could keep the old building as an entrance, but it's so small. That building was built when Tampa was a way smaller city, and it's totally inadequate for any sort of real transit solution here.
There is room around. Right now we're trying to get.
I mean, it's a small site. It's a tricky site for sure, but anything is possible, I believe.
There's a building behind. My understanding it's owned by CSX, but between that building and the historic building,
That's a lot of room to work with.
yeah.
The city could partner with a developer and build onto that and have co-work space. Maybe even people could rent spaces out in there. It doesn't have to be public use. Maybe the original building could be public use. Put a little restaurant in there, partner with a local coffee operator. Let's do the damn thing, And something like that, what are the roadblocks? Like, if there was an ambition to do something like that, how would it get done, or like what would get in the way of that?
I think I think a roadblock is that government is not always the best vehicle to get things done.
Yeah.
You look at the Strat Center, Tampa Museum of Art, Tampa Theater, all of those are aquarium. They're all run by nonprofits. The city, the buildings are owned by the city, but the city outsources it to outsources management to the nonprofits. In the case of Tampa Union Station, there is a Friends of Tampa Union Station, but in 1994 they gave the building to the city because they liked and trusted your grandfather. They gave it to them. That organization is not allowed by contract to manage the renovation, so it's up to the city then. And if you look at downtown in total, what used to happen with the CRA money is that it would go to subsidize developers. And I think that's unfair. I don't think we should pick favorites. It's not fair that one developer gets a subsidy and another one doesn't.
Yeah.
So what I did, and my colleagues also, is we moved what downtown Tampa was missing that downtown St. Pete had is the activity, the organic growth. We had buildings, but not the connectivity and the activity of what was going on. And so we've invested heavily through the CRA. This is money that only can be spent in the CRA district. And then in the case I'm about to talk about is downtown. We can only spend in downtown, but we put in money in the Strat Center, Tampa Museum of Art, Tampa Theater, the Jackson House, the Aquarium, and Tampa Union Station. And to give you an idea, Strat Center, the CRA is spending 25%. The private sector is matching it with 75%. Same thing with Tampa Museum of Art. So we're only paying 25 cents on the dollar, but we still own the building. So we own the 100%, but we only have to pay 25%.
Sounds like a good investment.
And so what they're doing is...
But did they pay the city rent, or how does the city collect money on that? Through property taxes? Is that how the CRA... Can you talk about how the CRA is organized quickly? Like, is it through property taxes? How does the CRA generate revenue? Sales tax?
So a CRA, it was set up by state statute, and it says that if you have an area with slum or blight, you can create a line around the area, and then whatever property taxes are collected on that day, that's the floor. All those property taxes continue to go into the general fund of the city or county. After that day, every additional dollar can only be spent in that CRA district.
Got it.
And only on certain things, mostly on physical infrastructure.
Got it. So the city owns 100% of these buildings, but only has to pay a quarter of the dollar spent to maintain them through the partnership with the nonprofits.
And if you want to see the economic impact, besides all the people that go to restaurants and all that, look around the Strat Center. There's no space left anymore. It's completely built up all around.
Yeah.
In fact, I wish we had reserved some of the land around them. But as they go to the next level and they expand, the Tampa Museum of Art and the Strat Center are going to expand to the riverfront, and they're going to offer free programming on the riverfront to engage more people and to bring more life and activity.
Yeah, it sounds like it's well worth the investment.
Tampa Theater, which everybody loves, I think it was built in 1926. It had gone through a partial renovation about 10 years ago. And think about the plaster. As you look at the stage, the plaster on both sides, it hasn't been touched really in 100 years. And what happened at some point in the 80s is the building wasn't being used. Somebody went through and spray washed a bunch of that stuff. And so now they have to go through and meticulously bring experts in to identify what the original paint color was, what the lighting was, and how to recreate or touch up those figures and repaint the skylight and everything.
Sounds pricey.
And so we through the CRA put the money in so they can do that. But in 2 or 3 years when that's done, Tampa Tampa Theater will be protected for the next 100 years.
But what about from a federal government standpoint? So is that place on the National Register of Historic Places?
I think it is.
So does the federal government, if it's protected, right? Because that's federal, correct? That's like a U.S. federal protection, essentially, right? But do they give any money to the city to help maintain these structures, or they only protect them through law?
The foundation runs that, and so they can work with the city to ask for grants, but they operate it.
Sounds like we could. I mean, I think the point in a lot of this that I'm thinking is it's extremely expensive for the city to maintain these historic structures. And Tampa Union Station, I actually went there a few weeks ago. It was like a few months ago, actually. And it's like, the paint's peeling. It doesn't look so good on the inside. And it's still operational, right? People are coming in and out. It's kind of a bad impression for our city, but it's an old historic building. It probably costs a fortune to maintain it. At what point is the city spending so much money on something that is just old versus can we apply for grants and redo the whole thing?
On Tampa Union Station, the city has applied for grants, and with other historic buildings, the city has, or our partners have, and they also get operating grants from different places. So that is ongoing. The bigger thing looking backwards is we need to have a vision of how our city is going to connect. And I was very involved in development of downtown St. Pete, and we started with what I call the software, the connectivity of the people, and a lot of it was around the arts. We started with the software and the connectivity, and then the buildings came afterwards. In Tampa, they built the hardware, and now we're building the software.
That's exactly right. Yeah, for so long in Tampa, we've had, and we still have, horrible roads, sidewalks that go to nowhere, broken all across, old brick roads that are bouncy, like right over here on our street in front of the building. You kind of have to go back in time, though. I mean, the clock does need to be wound back, and those things do need to get fixed. But I totally agree with you. The foundation of a city in terms of the infrastructure, the roads, right, the landscape, the parks, the public spaces, all of that comes before the buildings. And in Tampa, we've had so many new shiny objects over probably the past decade or so. And it is sexy and exciting, and people love to see it. Some people don't, But at the end of the day, I don't think any of that matters if I'm driving there with broken roads and unfavorable schools and horrible traffic and traffic lights that don't support the flow. It's like if you have all these challenges and then a sexy condo building, like what the fuck is the point of the building? You know what I mean? So I believe Tampa over the next, and it seems like we've been doing this with this administration, and I hope it continues in the next one. We have to keep writing checks on all this stuff and this infrastructure and these roads. We can't live in this broken city for any longer. The good news is it's getting fixed, but I think we have a hell of a long way to go.
A few different responses to that. Number one, if you go to a website called tampascorecard.com, my hobby is economic development. I've been involved in economic development for a long time. Most cities measure success by economic indicators. In Tampa, for a long time, we've had what I call the edifice complex. If you ask anybody, what is the success of the last 10 years? Has Tampa been successful? Most people will say, yes, look at Water Street.
Right.
And Water Street's great. It's a beautiful investment. But if you go to tampascorecard.com, what you'll find, and there's a PowerPoint there there that you can watch, but what you'll find is that compared to other cities, and I'm about to do an update on this, go to, keep going.
Oh, this is your report here.
So
interesting.
We could spend a half hour going through this, but per capita income, if you look at this just on a raw basis, Tampa is third. You see that St. Pete and Fort Lauderdale are better than us on per capita income. You can look at the raw numbers, but you take what people earn and look at it on an average per person basis. Go to the next slide. But then what we find out by digging deeper in the numbers, and I worked with some of the best economists in the state on this, including Moaz Lemium, who was the head of the College of Business at USF, now the president of UNF. But what you find is that Tampa has an abnormally high percentage of people that make more than $200,000 a year. And so what that does is that throws our numbers off. And if you keep going, median household income, so this is just looking at the midpoint of what people earn, Tampa's third there again. Keep going. And so sometimes politicians compare us to Austin, Charlotte, and Atlanta and say, now we've caught up with the other big cities. So let's look at it. This is census data that anybody looking to come to Tampa can look up themselves. What it shows is we're not even close. We're not even moving the same trajectory. We're kind of moving up, but we're not moving the same trajectory.
So it's per capita income. Atlanta is 55,000. We have Austin 48, Charlotte 43, Tampa's down at 40, which is really significantly lower than Atlanta.
And this is 3 years ago. And as far as I recall, the disparity has gone up. Keep going. I'll show you a couple more. Keep going. So this is what people look at when they're looking to come to a community, because wherever you are on the woke scale or political scale, you can't manage a large employment base without being aware of diversity.
Mm-hmm.
And women in our community, to some extent, feel disadvantaged. And so if you look at the disparity in men and women workers, the difference in Tampa is 9,000. So we're out of the 6 largest cities in Florida, we're the 3rd worst. Go to the next one. And this just shows the trajectory of it, which means that it's popping up, which means the problem is getting worse, not better. Keep going down. So this is African-American Caucasian. And then what it shows is that the disparity is 32,000. So we're the 2nd worst. And when Moaz helped me present this a couple years ago, he said, our strategy can no longer be to say that, thank God that Miami or Fort Lauderdale is worse and we're 2nd worst. We need, instead of setting buildings as the goal, buildings are a means to get to the goal. They're part of the output, not the outcome. The outcome is how do we move people up the economic food chain?
Well, how do we move everyone up? How does everyone have a better opportunity?
Let me show you one more, because this will partly answer your question. Keep going. Next one. Oh, this is a really interesting one, because look at from 2000, the Great Recession ended in 2009.
Right.
2011, we'd already been 2 years past the Great Recession. Look what happened in the middle class. Look at that red line. For most of the decade after that, our middle class shrank.
Wow.
And people say, well, other cities did too. Well, they didn't really.
Not St. Petersburg according to the graph.
And what this
not
shows,
Orlando.
Out of Florida cities, we're 2nd worst in middle class. And what it means about Tampa is we have a very wealthy, happy, to some extent, upper class, but our middle class, and you'll see poverty in a second. Keep going. People living in poverty, we're 2nd worst in the state, and we have been for 12 years. Keep going. There's one. Keep going. And anybody can find this, tampascorecard.com. Keep going. Okay, this is a really important one that answers your question.
Okay.
If you're talking about multi-generational wealth, the first thing that cities and countries do is they try to help people buy homes.
Right.
Singapore, we can't copy their plan, 92% home ownership rate. But
boy, that's
look
incredible.
At St. Petersburg, 63%.
Right.
Tampa's 50%. And the African-American home ownership in Tampa is 39%. Well, have you ever heard anybody talk about the home ownership rate and how we have a gap? Even and the state average is 65%. I don't even have that up there. But why shouldn't we aspire to at least be equal with the state average?
We should, but aren't there so many factors at play? Like, first of all, what's the reason behind the data? Why would we stack up at 50% where St. Petersburg's 62%? Is it because there's older, retired, wealthier people in St. Petersburg that can afford homes, that there aren't as many in Tampa? There's more younger people in Tampa. Like, there's a reason behind the data. And then what could we do locally to fix it? Isn't this more of a national policy, interest rate environment, insurance environment issue?
Well, you can look at it. It's not, if you count for differences by state or national, you look at what just other cities in Florida are doing.
Right.
So it shows that it's something that's happening here. And even St. Petersburg across the bay is better than we are. There are a lot of different factors, and the USF people are great at predictive analytics, and they're offering to help us with that. But for example, if you ask Ernest Coney from the CDC, there are 2,000 families that have been through an FHA approved training program. And this is where you go through for like 6 months and you learn how to save money. You actually have to save money, and you learn how to budget. They say once you get a mortgage, you're going to have to pay the principal, interest, the maybe maintenance fee or a budget for repairs, and you have to pay insurance and taxes. They help everybody budget all that so they're ready to buy a house. A few months ago, he told me we have 2,000 families right now who are eligible to buy houses. What we need to do is put a stock on the table. what we've been doing is subsidizing rental units. And rental units are important. We have a huge shortage of rental units, but we're never going to change these numbers long term until we allow people to buy units. And here's the thing, if we subsidize a rental unit, that's just a subsidy that goes out the door. One of the ideas that Ernest and I talked about, and these aren't the exact numbers now, but let's say he can build a house for $280,000 and somebody at 80% AMI can buy a house at $180,000. We could, through a city or CDC function, we could offer a $100,000 interest-free second mortgage. They don't have to pay payments. They don't have to pay interest on it. And so they just have to pay the interest and payments for $180,000. Let's say in a few years that house is, instead of $280,000, it's now worth $500,000. They get to keep all the increase. They get to keep all the equity that they get.
Yeah.
The only thing they have to do is, just as they have to pay back the first mortgage, they have to pay back the second. So they have leveraged tax dollars to make more money, to have that house, to have intergenerational wealth and homes. They can keep the house if they want, but when they sell it, that $100,000 goes back into that program.
Yeah.
And then we turn around and loan it to somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that concept is fantastic. And I think the goal of it is great, right? It's getting more people to own homes in the city. That should be a national policy. But the 180 or 250 appreciating to 500, I think, is the reason we're in this mess. The main reason we don't have home ownership is the cost of living. It's the cost of buying a home in Tampa. I probably paid double what I should have paid to buy my family a home. A few years ago, I mean, pre-COVID, you could buy an adequate home in South Tampa for $350, $400, $500 would have got you a fantastic home in South Tampa. Starter home, nothing ridiculous.
I remember Bayshore was $350, $400.
But I think this inflation, right? It's kind of the story of America, and it's not a Tampa issue. But I think there's incentives that could be put in place that would alleviate some demand pressure through increasing supply that might not necessarily lower. You don't want a sharp drop. You don't want a 15, 20% drop in housing costs. That's going to screw over a lot of people that have bought in the last few years. But you could have a leveling off or so. You could have a soft kind of landing of price appreciation. And we've kind of seen it. We've seen it through rising insurance costs, rising debt. You've seen this softening in the market here where prices aren't appreciating as quickly. But the reason why we don't have home ownership is because it costs $500,000 for a fucking starter home anywhere in Tampa. And anything below that, if hey, our budget's $300,000. I mean, people tell me that all the time. Well, you're looking at a little condo, maybe a 1970s built condo off of Zeal. Oh, well, now the HOA is $350 on that. They have to maintain this old building. Well, it doesn't work. Sorry, you're out of luck. Check. They're in the factor of, hey, we can't afford a home. But yet they have $50,000 saved up, right? So that's the issue really, is the cost of the real estate. It's just too expensive. And I think handing out money like that, I know that's a bad word. I shouldn't really say hand it out, but effectively giving that interest-free money away would only increase the demand, right? It's more money in someone's pocket. It increases demand. When you have a level supply and you increase demand, you have an increase in the price level. I almost think that
what's happening right now.
I think that might make the problem worse.
What's happening right now is that same amount of money is going as rental subsidies. So you give $1,000 a month or whatever to somebody so that they can pay their rent.
That makes sense.
And that is not a sustainable model. We can't.
So you're saying essentially switch it from a rental payment, which goes out the window, to a home ownership program.
The only way to fight inflation, we can't have deflation. We can't go backwards because that'll kill everybody's nest egg.
Right.
And people are going to continue moving here for the near future. So what we need to do is help people lock in. If you lock in by buying a home, at least certain parts of it, you've locked in inflation. So for the value of the home, you've locked it in. You still have to pay repairs and insurance and everything. There will be some increase. And by the way, these people I mentioned have all gone through trading programs.
Right.
But if you're renting, if the rent is $2,000 today and we're subsidizing $1,000, and then the rent goes up to $3,000, the city and county can't keep subsidizing that forever.
I like your idea for a couple of reasons. One, you're giving more people the opportunity to purchase a home rather than rent. Number two, the city's not necessarily losing money unless there was a situation where the city had to foreclose or the property was destroyed. I'm sure there'd be insurance and all that sort of stuff. But if the city's going to make the 100 grand back and it would let a family into a home, that's a fantastic
And right
thing.
now we get zero back.
And we get zero back.
So if we
because
get
it's all rent.
if we get any part of it, it would be better. The other thing, though, to answer your question is, I don't think we need to do it. I don't think we need more housing stock. We need affordable housing stock. We need workforce housing stock, and we need regular housing stock. Obviously, that will come through density. Either people will move farther and farther out, which some people are, or we've got to build more density.
Mm-hmm.
And the question then is, where are we going to build density? And there are certain areas in the city where we definitely need density and we can have it. And there are areas that we shouldn't have it. The area south of Gandy, for example, in the last administration had about 20,000 units approved. That's a risk for McDill because it takes an hour during a storm for the people in McDill to get out to even Gandy Boulevard. It's a risk for the people down there to get out because it's a coastal high hazard area. And they've already gotten a huge amount of density. But look, for example, Meridian in downtown. The west side of Meridian, SPP or the Water Street people are about to build, and they're going to build up to the FAA height that you can build because of Peter Oneida and Tampa Airport. You're going to Meridian. On the right side is Channel District.
Mm-hmm.
Channel District was designed with a step-up zoning. And so they don't allow maximum zoning there right now. So one of my proposals is, why don't we include Channel District in the CBD, the Central Business District, so that the city staff can approve it? There's no objection to density in downtown, which includes Channel District. Why would, on the left side of Meridian, on the west side of Meridian, you can go up to the FAA limit. On the right side, there are 4-story buildings. Why would we limit that to 4-story buildings?
Now, how did those other buildings get built that are over 4 stories on North Meridian?
They ask for variances.
They have to ask for a variance.
Yeah, and that costs several $100,000.
And what you're saying is, instead of asking council for a variance, it would just go to the staff, and the staff would say, "Okay, you're good to go."
But we wouldn't have variances though, because we would allow it by right up to the FAA limit. Now, by law, the Aviation Authority, sitting as a review authority, approves the FAA limit. So there is another level of bureaucracy you have to go through, but at least the city has cleared the way. And if you go to, can you go to Midtown?
You know where that is, David? Straight down Kennedy. You know where Kennedy is, right?
That's 275 in Dale Mabry.
David needs a training course. You'll get one though by being the producer, because we're always on this map. So follow 275, keep going west. Right there. So Midtown is that development to the south of the interstate.
So this project, the family, the Bromley companies, they bought this property 35 or so years ago. And the funny thing, scroll down a little bit, the other way. When I left to go to Singapore in the 80s, that property that you have the cursor over, that property, it had a big sign on it called Tampa Sphere. It was going to be this big thing that looked like Midtown. And when I came back 5 years later, it was a Walmart.
Quite the downgrade.
But if you go
there.
down, go back the other way down, and you can see Midtown. So this is it's a New York company that's been in and around Tampa for 35 years. They're very sensitive to the culture and climate of Tampa. They invest heavily in the arts. They built what they call Midtown Common, and there are restaurants and bars and other meeting spaces there. And the idea is that they can then develop throughout that. They're assembling more property. But can you hit the street view?
Where do you want them to go?
To the front on Dale Mabry.
Okay. That's on the left side, David.
Right there. So look up. This office building here does not go up to the FAA limit. It could have gone 2 or 3 more stories. The reason it doesn't go to the FAA limit is because they did not want to pay the huge fees for lawyers and everything to be able to go higher. Now, you can't see in this picture because it's not developed yet, but you see where the crane is in the back?
Yep.
In the very back. They're building another office tower there that's several stories higher than this one, and they paid like $250,000 in fees so they could come before City Council and everyone to get approval for that. And my point is, along Dale Mabry, you're not up against the neighborhood. why would you not be allowed to go to the FA limit?
Well, why did they choose to do it on the backside, which is what Lois is over there?
Because
or is that Himes?
once they, and I can't speak for them, but as I understand it,
I think it's Himes.
once they proved the concept and the development was successful, then and by the way, the first building filled up. I think it's 100%
And they said, okay,
occupied.
let's go big on the next one, basically.
Yeah. Can you go back to the aerial view?
But your point is, why not make it all by right? So there's none of this extra layers a developer has to go through when the neighborhood and the community doesn't object to it.
Exactly. Go south a little bit this way. So you have J. Alexander's, you have medical office, and then somewhere south of there, I think it might be, you have the Rivian building that used to be a Comp USA.
Yeah, right there, David.
So that is still a one-story building.
Yeah.
It's on a major arterial. It's not in a coastal high hazard area. Why would you not let that by right go up to a higher density?
Well, and I don't know if it traded, but it was for sale too, and it was a pretty damn good deal. I loved it. I thought, God, it was too expensive for me. It's a big price. I think it was more than $15 million, but you have a couple acres there on Del Mabry. But I think the challenge is a developer does not have it by right. So for them to purchase it and wait for the city to make it by right, or for them to purchase it and take the risk of the city saying no, they're not willing to.
And here's the other thing:
$15 million on that.
If the city changes it, it's an area-wide rezoning. If the city changes it, and I'm just talking about going to the right and left one street, but if we change it by right, then the current owners get the delta in the increase because the new developers don't have to pay for the legal fees.
Yeah.
But the point is that in many neighborhoods, they don't want density at all, or they have too much density already. In this area, you already have density. You already have a major thoroughfare. Why make developers jump through hoops? So if we have to build a lot of content quickly, why do that?
Well, I think the fact of all this is we know we're going to have an incredible amount of demand over the next however many decades in Florida, but also moving to the city of Tampa. It has to go somewhere. If it doesn't go somewhere, you have all of this demand and low supply, and you have an incredible price increase. And then that number of 50% gets even lower and lower and lower. And before you know it, young people like me, like David, like other hardworking, young, entrepreneurial, ambitious people are not going to have a shot. I just got lucky I found my house. But if I had waited and I kept renting in a few years and we don't get more density in here, what the hell? What's it going to cost for my kid to buy a home when he's my age in Tampa?
I have the same problem.
That's the fear. The fear is if we don't put density somewhere, right, it's going to be a problem for all of us.
I think there's general
where should it go? It should go where people don't object, number one. And number two, let the city be a city. You don't need to put a huge apartment building in a neighborhood like they did south of Gandy. But what you could certainly do is increase density in the urban core and Kennedy, Del Mabry, these major thoroughfares.
Can you just blow that out for a second? So if you look that kind of white building there at the bottom is on Kennedy. That's a high building, used to be, I think, the Time Life building.
Yeah.
So look at between Midtown and that building. My 15-year-old looked out and said, why is there not the same size buildings connecting those two?
Right.
And that was where the idea came from. We're not talking about going into the neighborhoods. We're just talking about the part along Del Mabry. And could you look at Del Mabry there? It's one of the ugliest roads
It's horrible.
in America, really. Could you Google Buenos Aires Boulevard?
How do you spell it?
Buenos
Argentina.
Buenos Aires.
Right there, capital of Argentina.
And then put Boulevard.
Now we're talking, Bill. I know we were going with this, and I love it.
And so,
yeah.
okay, look at that
Oh,
picture. So
Imagine people.
This picture right here.
Yeah.
So the businesses along that area have already said, we're okay putting together a midtown meaning the whole area. We're not talking about all of Del Mabry, just between 275 and Kennedy, only one block in each direction. But they can put together a business coalition to support putting, just like downtown did, putting together landscaping and other things. So if you look at Buenos Aires or Barcelona, they built these beautiful boulevards. And so Dale Mabry doesn't have to be, in that part anyway, doesn't have to be an ugly street. I'm not talking about Dale Mabry south of Kennedy because you don't have the room to do it. But this section of Dale Mabry could be a real jewel of our area, and we could build thousands of units right there.
Absolutely. But here's the challenge. Isn't Dale Mabry owned by the state, right? Or the county? How would that work?
The road is, but the development is regulated by the city. Could we go back to the map for a second, please? Go to the left.
So the road is owned by what? The state?
The state. Keep going to the left.
Well, the state needs to pony up and make that thing nice.
So here is West Shore Plaza. All that's being redeveloped. They're going to build up to the road, high density. Now that intersection there has been the one over here with the box. That's been a high density intersection for a long time. But if you go up West Shore, this area there will be developed. Keep going straight. West Shore is this road over here. So Andrew Wright now has gone in and bought these properties here next to Jefferson. And he bought all the old Al Austin properties. And he and some of the other developers there are looking at West Shore the same way Jeff Vinnick looked at downtown, and the same way Daryl Shaw looks at Ybor, the same way that the Nick Haynes and his father look at Midtown. This area, again, we've got neighborhoods to the east and west. We're not talking about going in the neighborhoods, but there's a lot of redevelopment that could happen here to build a lot more density. And the same thing, we could build a Barcelona or Buenos Aires style boulevard right along there to make it a very attractive, dense area with thousands more units.
You have to have a plan on that road, though, because Midtown's buildings on Dale Mabry, nor is it Cypress is the South Street, right? Is that Cypress or Columbus? I always get those two mixed up. You remember which one it was?
I don't remember.
Okay. David, can you go back to Midtown? The problem is if you don't have a cohesive plan, a future plan, where it's an actual coded plan for this, go drop the little man in front of Midtown again. You're going to get this problem, Bill. You're going to have these buildings that have parking lots in the front. There's no way to connect there. That's not walkable. It'll never look like Buenos Aires because those buildings are set back from the road.
No, but that's why
Do you know what I mean? Like that doesn't look good if you're trying to create a thoroughfare through
the
here.
reason why this is set back so far is because the city staff told them to do that. And the reason why it's not denser higher on the front is the city staff told them to do
Now, why would the city staff tell them to do that? Why wouldn't there be a plan to say, hey, this is absolutely an area that could look like a thoroughfare in Buenos Aires. Let's bring the buildings to the road, provide trees and landscaping to buffer the traffic, and then it's like a real walkable city. Midtown, I love Midtown. I appreciate Midtown. It's an awesome development. I really think it's great. But I think the big problem with Midtown is it's insulated in itself. It's not really connected to the surrounding neighborhoods. You have to drive and get inside of it before you enjoy it, versus the buildings are brought to the street like a real city.
Yeah, that's because of the regulation at the time, 6-7 years ago, when it started. But
It's
can you go back?
It's a suburban ideology to build it like that.
But the owners own buildings in Fifth Avenue. And
it wasn't their decision necessarily. This
No.
is like the city saying, "Hey, you need to push the buildings."
But they call this Midtown Common because, and if they disagree with me, they can put notes in the comments. But you look to the south, and you have like J. Alexander's, the medical center, and all that. They own some of these properties to the south, and then there are other friendly owners of the other properties. What we've talked to them, and this is just me having conversations with the city, has not moved forward.
Okay.
I've asked in general about rezoning this. But if we could put together an association, a Midtown Business Association of the business and property owners, at least from 275 down to Kennedy, then they can get together and advocate to help support our efforts to change some of these policies. And the connectivity to what's there already will be much better than it is now. Same thing with West Shore. West Shore, they always brag as the largest business district in Tampa or Tampa Bay area, but there's so many underused properties there.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you try to build a 20-story building in the middle of Hyde Park when you can build a building like that in West Shore and not go through the hassles? But we need to come up with a plan. We need to get businesses to support the plan. We need to have advocacy. And by the way, I didn't mention this yet, but right now the Planning Commission is going through updating the comprehensive plan, and the city is going through updating its code. Both are taking public input. And so if you agree or disagree with these ideas, these are just my ideas, but if you agree or disagree, you can give them feedback right now. And if you're a developer or business owner and you support them, please make sure your voices are heard, because right now we're in the process of changing this. The staff has told me instead of ad hoc changing some of these policies, they want it to all be in the new code and the new comprehensive plan. So we've got to make sure our voices are heard to change this.
And I'm on the Citizen Advisory Committee for that.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, so which is kind of cool. They're letting members of the public in and have a seat and have our say. And they've picked people from all sides, right? People that are developers and people that are from neighborhoods that are very conservative with this whole conversation, which is a good thing. You want to hear from everyone. So people can reach out to me. You can DM the page, send me an email, whatever you want to do. I'd love, this conversation to me is the most important. We're at a pivotal time in the city, and we need a plan. We need a cohesive plan for things like this. Otherwise, we're going to grow into a mess, kind of like we've already done in a lot of ways. You mentioned south of Gandy. I live there now. On the west side of the peninsula, where they've put all those single-use apartments, and now they're talking about building more in Rattlesnake Point, how's all that going to look? Anyone driving out of those apartments, hundreds and hundreds of units. Oh, I forgot a stick of butter. Let me get in my car and drive 15 minutes. And then it's a horrible, horrible way to plan out a city. And I think the dangerous thing is not taking a look at this area, right? Dale Mabry, an area where there's little objection. You're going to want to be cognizant of these neighbors and these people that live in this area. But I think you can accomplish both things at once. I think you can accomplish high density commercial with residential on the second floor, and by block 2 or 3 to the east and west, buffer it enough to where those neighbors aren't as affected.
Go one other area I want to show you. Can you blow out a little bit and then go north? I want to go north. Just follow 275 and go north. Go east and then north. Go to the right, and then follow around the curve and go north.
Never eat soggy
blow out.
Waffles, David. Do you know that one? North, east, southwest?
Maybe blow it up a little bit, or go out a little bit. There you go. Okay. So this area of density along that road that you're on, I think that's Fowler.
Yep.
A developer owns the University Mall, and they're partially redeveloping it right now. There are some other big parcels along there.
You got to go further north, David. Cross the river.
Are we not there yet?
Yeah, cross the river. Keep going north.
My eyes aren't good enough to see that.
Yeah, there's Busch Gardens. Keep going north, right there.
So you see that, you can just see from a distance the property, just leave it like that. You can see the property that has a chance to be redeveloped, and the parcels up front, like where Bennigan's used to be. I think it's Portillo's now or something. But all along there, we could build higher density. So the advantage of this area, the economic engine of this area, is USF.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that USF has done is they've drawn people from all over the world. This area, it has our poorest neighborhoods and our richest neighborhoods, but it also has a mixture of ethnicities from all over the world. That's why you get this unique collection of all these different kinds of restaurants up there: Indian restaurants, Vietnamese restaurants, all kinds of stuff, Italian, French. And I think there's an opportunity to celebrate the diversity of that area, plus the intellectual investments and creativity of the area. A few years ago, when Judy Genshaw was president of the University of South Florida, I was able, in my professional capacity, to help her write the first ever real strategic plan for USF. And I got to go in all the different departments of USF. And there's so much incredible creativity and innovation. And what we need to do is figure out, how do we get the rest of the community to have access to it? And so with the USF property and this property, and now Real Law is carrying on many of the things that Judy did, and it works well with the business community. If we can work on this, we can build a whole intellectual innovation area, and not in just a buzzword, but we can really connect and start businesses from the ideas that are coming there. One challenge is that the economic engine of the area's USF, the economic engine of USF is the medical school. And a few years ago, they moved it to downtown. And so that's creating thousands more trips on the road every day.
Yeah.
And the doctor's offices and other related businesses moved to this area because they're close to the medical school. And so we have to come to terms with that at some point and figure out, what do we want downtown and what do we want in this area? If all the medical related businesses from that area move to downtown, it'd be great for downtown, but it'd be devastating for this area. And so we need to figure out, what do we do? The other thing is that this area is not in a coastal high hazard area. It's in high ground, and it's easy access to 275, unlike the area south of Gandy. So it provides easy access to leave town if a storm comes. And so we need to be planning on a citywide scale, not just in the neighborhoods that people want to move in right now.
It's kind of interesting in Tampa. There's almost like 3 downtowns. You know, you've got this Midtown West Shore area. You've got traditional downtown, the CBD, and then this, what do we call it, University area, along with the University Mall and USF.
And Ybor really is developing as a separate business district.
But Ybor, to me, along with Gasworks and the Channel Side and all the growth, it's almost becoming this one big urban core. I guess my kind of fear, my thoughts would be, if we're spread so thin and all these areas develop in their own densification, man, that's going to create transit problems in between. I mean, we're forcing everyone in a car. I love the idea of these 3 different huge commercial hubs in the city, and maybe we'll talk about the neighborhood nodes too. But we should have some sort of a transit between these 3 areas. Like, you should be able to hop on some sort of a rail system. Dash, I think, is great, and investing in autonomous travel eventually one day would be fantastic. But you got to get people between these 3 areas. And West Shore, the airport's included in West Shore too. So it's like, without transit between these areas, how the hell is this all going to work?
We thought by now we would have autonomous vehicles. The Expressway Authority and others have been testing it for a long time. St. Pete's been testing them. They're not up to the technology is not there yet. We thought by now you would have, for example, 10 passenger autonomous buses. About 50-60% of the cost of a bus is staff. And so if you take that out and make it autonomous, in theory, it would remove that. You could run an autonomous vehicles at quicker headways, for example, from downtown up to Cypress, cut across and go to the airport. And then if we prove that route, then we eventually could build a dedicated lane, and then we could build fixed rail, or we could just use the autonomous vehicles.
Right.
But we can't use the autonomous vehicles right now. HART is in a funding crunch. It's a whole other discussion we can have.
Well, we definitely should talk about that.
During the Martinez administration, the ad valorem taxes were 9 point something mils, and remember at that time in the 80s, that Tampa was the center of business in Florida, really. Miami didn't really develop that until the late 90s, early 2000s. And Bob Martinez was very powerful politically. So he got the state law changed to allow the city of Tampa to move the transit authority outside the city to be funded by its own agency with its own taxing authority. He did the same thing with the housing and the housing authority. And he was able to move the ad valorem taxes down from 9 point something mils to like 5 point something. I forgot the exact number. But that's because they moved the millage that they were spending on housing and transportation to these other 2 agencies. The thing that came with the legislation is that the county also has seats on those agencies. And back then, I guess everybody was getting along better. Right now, you have a difference in opinion. The way for HART to increase its service is to increase taxes in some way. It can do that right now. I think they're charging $1 million, and they have like $120 million budget. They can go up to, I think, $3 million, which means they could have a budget of like $400 million. So they could triple their service if they increase the taxes. The argument is that because of the representatives of the county, that they could never get the votes. To raise the millage, it's complicated, but they have to have the HART board to vote for it. Then the city, all 3 cities have to vote on it. The county has to vote on it, and then it has to go for a referendum. Once it passes in a referendum, then the county has to vote on it again, and then I think the HART board has to vote on it again.
More service for what, though? Buses?
For anything, if HART is operating it. So then what happened recently is that advocates for transit came to the city and said, we want you to fund the buses. Well, the city lowered its millage rate years ago and moved that millage rate to HART. So if we start to fund, if the city starts to fund transit, which HART is supposed to do, that means eventually we've got to raise our millage rate, Why should the city do that when there's an agency called HART that's dedicated to do that? So if the city is going to supplement what HART's supposed to do, then why not get HART to give us our millage back and let us run the transit system ourselves?
Well, I think the city should run its own transit, period.
I remember when I was in University of Tampa, I came to meet Bob Martinez as mayor, and we talked to his chief of staff. And do you remember the tram that went between Harbor Island
The
and
people mover. Oh, yeah.
and so it had started around that time, and
Pull up the people mover, because not a lot of people know about that.
and they talked about how we asked as students, is it possible that this could go all over the city? And they said, yeah, we'd love to make it go all over the
Yeah.
city. Well, a few years later, it was losing money. It was really hard to maintain, and your grandfather took it out because it was much cheaper for taxpayers. Hardly anybody was taking it.
So it was a monorail that went from Harbor Island to downtown Tampa, crossed over the river. You can actually, even today, as you drive over, is that the Beneficial Bridge? I always get those names confused. I think that's the Beneficial Bridge, right?
I always get them mixed up.
Or is that the other one? But anyway, it was a monorail. You can actually see the pilings today. They're still in the water. It's the Western Bridge, and it goes right by the convention center. So this was an old monorail that got taken out. TampaPix.com is a great resource. I use it all the time for history, and they've got great pictures on there.
You know, Rick Kreisman, former mayor of St. Pete, had talked about having gondolas. I've ridden the gondola system at Disney now, and it's quite nice. It's small vehicles. They move fast. They keep moving all the time. The downside is during a hurricane, what happens to the gondolas? What happens to the system that could get knocked down? The challenge we have is because of the water table, we can't really go underground. It's possible. I mean, they built a tunnel under the English Channel, but it's very, very expensive. And so the best way in places like New York have granite underneath, so they can, in London, they can dig underneath. But if you're going underwater, it's very, very expensive to maintain it, keep water from leaking into it. And so what we would do is something above ground. So then you've got to get access to the right of way, or you've got to go in the air. In the air, you either get a system like this, or you get gondolas. And the city has looked at all of these different options multiple times. The issue is always funding.
But what can the city really do? As you mentioned, like if we don't have full control, and if the county is the one that is going to be voting on these sort of things and taxing and operating it, what the hell can the city do, right?
The only thing the city could do is raise ad valorem taxes, which I don't think is fair. Why would you put all the burden on homeowners, for example, compared to a sales tax where tourists pay a big chunk of it? Why not let tourists pay? Also, with a sales tax, if you spend less, you, in theory, don't spend as much on taxes. So you can try to get out of it. If you own a home and suddenly, and let's say you're a retiree and suddenly we raise the taxes on you, you could be in big trouble. The homestead exemption limits how much the valuation of your home can go up.
Yes.
But the city and county determine what the millage rate is. So if we jacked up the millage rate, you would pay a lot more taxes. Nobody wants that.
No.
Republican, Democrat, nobody wants that. So what's been proposed four times in Tampa and Hillsborough County is a sales tax. And I can talk to you about why I think the campaign's lost. But I think they had the wrong strategy.
Well, offer transportation is one of those, correct?
It's the reason that CIT just barely won last night. You have to, first of all, they built the campaigns around political personalities. And even if somebody wins an election 60%, that means 40% of the people don't like them.
Right.
And so why would you brand your initiative with a person who you might lose 40% of the votes for? And if you have multiple ones, you might lose other votes.
Isn't it just can it be broken down to a simple conservative ideology for people that live in the county that aren't going to use the trolley? They're not going to use a freaking monorail or whatever the hell we do. And so they don't want to pay for it.
66% of people last night voted for an education tax. And not everybody has kids that go to school. Many people send their kids to private school. Now, it does affect charter schools also.
So you don't believe that logic. Like you think it's actually deeper than that. Because in my head, I'm like, it's just the simple fact that people that live out in the county, there's about 1 million more people that live in the county than live in the city limits. I think there's 1.4 million total in Hillsborough County. There's about 400,000 in the city of Tampa, right? So those voters out there, a lot of them probably feel, why the hell would I tax myself if I'm never going to use these transit options?
If a program is presented correctly, you'll show solutions for each of those. Also, many of the people in the county work in the city or pass through the city or use city services. And even if you don't plan on taking transit in some way, you would want the roads to be clear.
For sure.
Nobody wants to sit in traffic.
That would be my argument.
And so I could go through in detail and tell you about the background on each of these campaigns, but I think what has to happen next time is that we need to hire a public affairs firm out of state, so they're not tied politically to anybody. And we need to run campaigns based on the merits of what's being proposed, not on personalities.
I totally agree. It'd be fantastic. But all for transportation passed, and then it got thrown out. Now, that was an issue basically with semantics, right? That was kind of just the way it was written, some of the wording and the language of what that
on the surface,
referendum was.
On the surface, that's what it was. But you could also argue that the team that put it together should have anticipated that. The other thing is that there's a group of ultra-conservative people who don't believe in tax increases, and they go by different names. They used to be called Tea Party, now Patriots or whatever they call themselves today. No tax for tracks. They've organized around all of the tax campaigns. But for example, one of the All for Transportation initiatives, the pro side had $4 million. The other side had like $200,000, and they won.
Wow.
And whether you say they won the ballot and then lost in the courts, they still lost because the tax isn't there. And so you would presume for $4 million, you'd have a campaign that would win. The whole business community came for it. The next campaign was $2 million. The one before those two was 1.4 that we know about. So what happens though is that the campaigns refuse to engage the ultra conservative people. I run a program called Catholic on Tampa, or I help run a program called Catholic on Tampa on Fridays. It is what I call an open source community group. It's like a civic group with no membership. Anybody can come. You're supposed to be speaking at it. And we invited the Tea Party people to speak to tell us why they were against all the, I mean, isn't that a fair question? Mm-hmm. Why did you vote against these? Why did you argue against them? Why did you spend money to fight these? And you know what? They didn't get up and say, we're against taxes and we're against transit. They got up and gave specific reasons about why they were against it. And if you were working on the pro campaign, you should have been there taking notes, and then you should have adapted your campaign and come back after that and then present it to the same group, because we allow equal time, and say, here's how we listen to what they said and we're going to adapt our program. Well, once you listen to a group that's against you and you try to adapt your program, as long as it doesn't destroy the integrity of it, then you can move forward and you don't have opposition anymore. Instead, guess what happened? Because we had that group speak, the All for Transportation people refused to speak. Well, that right there shows you have the wrong strategy.
Well, I think there's this huge push of getting people that are with you to grow in numbers and focusing on moving forward. That's what you're alluding to when you're saying, forget the 40% that doesn't believe in this. You should be convincing the 40%. That used to be the American way. It used to be a dialogue. It used to be, tell me why you think you're right, and I'll tell you the same, and let's talk about it.
Yeah, that's the point.
And I want to convince you. I want to convince you I'm right. I want to convince you that these taxes are a good thing for our community. Is it more money out of your pocket? Yes, but there's a return. There's a return that we're not talking about. And the anti-tax groups are drawing hard lines and saying, we don't want any more taxes. Well, what if you knew what those taxes did specifically? What if you knew there was actually a net benefit? Would you change your mind? Maybe. 40% could turn into 20% if the efforts were focused on those people.
My philosophy, and I have a PR firm, although I don't work on city-related projects, but my philosophy is that if somebody is an opponent, go meet with them.
Yeah.
When I'm on city council, people yell at me, I go meet with them. And most of the time we find common ground. So why not?
Yeah.
And if you can find common ground, then you turn an enemy a lot of times into a proponent, because you respected them enough to meet with them. But if you let our opposition speak, I'm not going to go speak, that just shows you don't have a serious strategy. That shows an arrogance that you think you're going to win just because you have more money. But over and over again, what you see that the group with more money doesn't always win. Why is it that the Americans won the revolution against the British? There are a lot of reasons, but they were outnumbered constantly. Mm-hmm. But they figured out how to use guerrilla warfare to win. That's the same thing these guys are using. So instead of disrespecting them and fighting them, sit down and listen to them and figure out how you're going to adapt your program so they won't oppose you next time.
Has this shifted in your career? I mean, you've been in this business for quite a while, right? Like, have you seen a shift where both sides are ignoring each other and just,
I had never seen that happen before.
huh?
I've never, that happened twice.
Seems like kind of a silly strategy.
I think it is.
Yeah.
And
Back
I've
to,
told them that I thought it was a silly strategy.
well, I think convincing people of why their position is incorrect and why yours is better is the literal foundation of this country. And I think if we lose that, we're in a world of shit. But I also think we've kind of already lost it, and that's the reason why we have these issues. It's the reason why we don't have adequate transit. It's the reason why our roads are shitty, and we've had problems with paying our teachers well and paying this and paying that. It costs a lot of money to do all this stuff. And if all you're hearing is you're going to have to pay more, Bill, more taxes are going to come out of your pocket, blah, blah, blah. If that's all you're hearing and you're not hearing any sort of cost benefit analysis and the reasons why, hey, maybe this half penny sales tax is a good idea for our region. If you're not hearing any of that info, you're just going to vote no. It's a problem.
So here is, I think, what underpins it. It's how people look at leadership in our community. And what happened, and I'll start from the end and work back, is that if there's an oligarchy of power, if the oligarchy thinks they're in charge and they have omnipotent power, they will just do anything to get what they want, and they don't care about anybody else. And then until the 80s, most cities in the United States had 4 or 5 older white men that ran everything. An example here is what was the GTE building. Now I think it has PNC on it, Tampa City Center. That building, you had the head of TICO, GTE, and several others came together, and old-time Tampa people know all the names. But if that group got together and said, we're going to build a tall building here. It was the first new skyscraper in a long time. And that helped redevelop downtown. Go forward to the next generation, there in any city, other groups said a small group like that can't have power anymore. First of all, we need racial diversity and other things. But we just wouldn't put all the power with some people. So what happened is organizations gained more and more power. In the old days, if you wanted something passed, you'd go to those 4 or 5 people, get them to check the box, and you'd get it. By the 90s and early 2000s, if you wanted something passed, you'd go to the 10 organizations like the Chamber, Downtown Partnership, Tampa Bay Partnership, et cetera, and you get them to check the box. Most people today are working on that model from the 90s. What's happened in the last 10 years that people don't see is that power no longer exists with a title. Just because I'm called a city council member doesn't mean I have any power. Just because the mayor has a title doesn't mean she has actual power. The power is with the constituencies that behind us. And so I told the chair of the chamber a few years ago, I said, if there's an issue and you can only mobilize 20 people, but somebody else who has no formal authority at all can mobilize 2,000 people, arguably that person's going to have more power. And so power today in communities is about forming coalitions of people who have constituencies. And so you have to look at everybody as having influence. It's no longer a hierarchical oligarchic system where only a few people have power, because if the few people try to have power, groups like the Tea Party will come in and crush that power. So instead, you have to be open to working with everybody. And what a leader does is they build consensus to make the most people happy. You won't make everybody happy, but you build consensus. You don't just do what a small group wants. You build consensus with a broader group.
Wow. I love that philosophy, that thought about how many people with one common vision are more powerful than whoever sits in the ivory tower, whoever's the president, whoever's the governor, the mayor, whatever. The people have the power. That was always the idea in this country. Yeah, I love that a lot. On the people mover, I see a correlation here with the trolley. You mentioned like when my grandfather tore all that down, the reason at the time was simply, no one was riding it. If no one's riding it, it's a waste of money. Let's tear the damn thing down.
And it costs a lot. There was a lot. I think it was $250,000 a year or something like that.
Yeah, it's bleeding money, right? The trolley is free. We've got a grant. It's running out January 2025. Hillsborough County has said, basically that they can't pay for it anymore without a new grant. And they're asking people right now to give their opinion. Should we do a fair? Should we apply for more grants? What are we going to do? The fear is, and I don't know if I've fully subscribed to this. You might know more data than me. If there's a fair, ridership will massively decrease. I'm not entirely sure of that. I think there's ways to mitigate it. I think if there was an app, made it easier for people to pay, that might lessen it. Who the hell has change, right? My fear with the trolley is that it will have a fare. Ridership will decrease. City of Tampa goes to apply for the extension and all the money needed to do that. FDOT, federal government, possibly looks at the numbers and says, your ridership's down. We're not going to fund this thing. The city goes, well, we don't have the money to extend it. So it sits as a novelty for the next decade. Ridership further decreases because it's frankly an old rackety trolley. You got the windows down. It's a little slow. It sits at traffic lights, right? People stop riding it. Ridership decreases, and eventually the city tears the damn thing out like they did the monorail in the 90s.
And the streetcars, what was that, in the 40s or something?
40s. It was the late 40s where all the trolley tracks were tore up. They were put back in the 2000s, and my fear is they'll get torn up again because of this. So where do these two things intersect? I know Tampa owns the trolley, correct? But the county operates it, pays for it through the taxes we described earlier, right? And essentially runs it. The city owns it. Shouldn't the city be the one to own it, operate it, maintain it, pay for it, and ensure the longevity of it so that it doesn't get tore out in the next decade?
So on city council, we all have specialty things that we're experts in. And I've got a colleague who's an expert on the trolley. And so I rely on him to show us all the information.
Yeah.
I think Hart runs it, if I remember correctly. And I think there's a small city subsidy still. But
can you go to maybe type in Hart Tico streetcar? I just want to be correct. I thought the city owned it, but Hart operates it and runs it. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Hart owns it. I'm not exactly sure.
So, but to answer your question, we know that ridership went up substantially when the grant came in,
right?
When it
Correct.
was free, and we don't. Since then, Water Street has been completed, and we don't know what would happen. We would have to take away that.
What's your indication? Do you think ridership would dramatically decrease, or do you think people would still enjoy it?
I think it would go down. The question is, what's the cost benefit if you have fewer people and now you put more cars on the road potentially?
Fares. So go to fares. Is it just going to say fares? There are none. Fee or free? Take a quick survey to submit your feedback. See, the problem is I don't know the deep political implications of voting on that survey one way or the other. I mean, should it be free or should there be a fee? It's like, well, that's a simple question. Should something cost money or not cost money? Well, what are the details behind that? That's my question. What does it mean?
Everything is a trade-off. In your house, if you get a $200 a month raise, what should you spend it on? Would you have better food? Would you pay for new medicine? Would you pay for clothes for your kid? What are the things that you're going to spend on? The city doesn't have a lot of incremental money. With all the new development, we end up with like $40 million a year in new money. People think it's a huge windfall, but it's not actually that much money in the context of a $2 billion budget. And so if you're trying to fund anything new that we need, we always need to give raises to employees. We need eventually new cars for police. We need some of our fire trucks are 20 years old. We need to replace them. We need new safety equipment for firefighters.
Yeah, the list goes on.
And so if let's say somebody wanted $1 million a year to subsidize a streetcar, right now the budget for road repair is $11 million a year. We could increase that by 10%, for example, if we move that money into the road repair. Or $1 million could help, if we did that program I mentioned earlier, it would help 10 families buy homes. So we have to look at all the trade-offs and figure out what's the best use of the funds and figure out, what other sources of funding there are. We don't know what's going to happen at the federal.
They're slapping Bud Light sponsorships all over it. That must pay for something, right?
But I don't think it's very much. It's the same thing with transit. When you take a 25 cents to ride transit, is it really worth the hassle to collect it and maintain all of that? So we're going to find out. They're going to be presenting it to us. The two big questions with streetcar. Number one is you mentioned it's kind of slow and rickety. the thing that your grandfather and other folks did at the time is they built something that looks historic, and people love it because it looks historic. The proposal that the consultants put on the table is we need a newer, faster, more modern streetcar. So like Europe has. So it'll move faster, it's more maneuverable, but it won't look like this. And so there are many people, especially Patrick Manteiga, who've been leading a campaign against.
He was on the show, yeah.
Against the new streetcar design. And then...
Well, is he also advocating to take off the Bud Light stickers all over the streetcar? Because that's not very historic.
Probably.
Like, what are we doing here? Like, it's either a viable transportation option in the city or not. It shouldn't be looked at as a novelty. The thing is packed. It sits at a red light. Like, increase the frequency, make it less rickety, get the adequate air conditioning, get the stupid Bud Light stickers off, and let's do this thing. It should connect to West Shore, and it should go north to the other area in University.
The most important thing is, where do you take it from here?
Right.
And one of the challenges we face, somewhere you can find a map, but one of the things is that it goes into Fort Brooke right now, and ideally it would go down Franklin Street.
Right.
Downtown Partnership has just presented a plan to, I don't know if there's a future plan map somewhere you can pull up.
We've posted it on our Instagram, David.
But what they're going to have to do is, you can show them on this map where that last dot is on the left. They're going to make a hard right onto Whiting and then go up, I think, Marion Street. And well, I don't know how much that slows you down making a hard right there, but we'll see when they build it. And then you have to go north.
Well, I don't know if you can. I know this is coming before council, so I don't know if you can talk details. I don't really know the rules on that. You say what you want, but what are they coming to you to say? Like, what is the discussion? Are they asking city council to vote on either a fare or no fare, or what are they coming?
No, that's all.
That's
hard.
public. Okay,
they would ask us for a subsidy to affect infrastructure or upkeep or something like that.
Can you speak on that today, on your thoughts? Like, would you be in favor of a city subsidy towards the streetcar?
I want it. We do have one already, and I think it's through the CRA instead of the city. But I'm okay continuing that. But as we look forward, we have to look at what money we have, and what people have told us loud and clear is they don't want us to raise property taxes, and so the city is limited then in what it can do. If some group is able to pass a sales tax, that money would go to Hart, to the county and the city, and then some of the new money could go into a program like this.
Is the city legally allowed to create a special district that would have a small tax to help subsidize the streetcar in the area that uses it?
We have a special district in downtown. There's one in Tampa Heights area. They tried to create one in Ybor City, and there was pushback against it.
Yeah.
And I think the legislature has to be involved in some way, and there was some pushback there. It's all of that is possible, but the numbers to build that are pretty high. The other one, if you look at to the left, you can see the area they're looking to expand,
right? And
eventually that could go on up to Columbus or whatever. But on the right side, you see I-4 up above it. Somewhere between that one dot before it turns right and I-4 is where Brightline was supposed to go. And they can't bring Brightline into Tampa Union Station because they would have to build an overpass, and nobody wants a big bridge going through Ybor City. So what they would do is they would go down I-4 and then just dump out right there near that one dot. But just to go a couple blocks is millions of dollars to connect to that.
The problem again with Brightline though is, where do you go? Like, is there just a huge parking lot? You drive your car to the Brightline station? I think all of kind of what we've discussed today, like the glue for this entire conversation is transit. And if people can't get from one place to another, it's a huge problem. I think the trolley line should figure out a way to go at or near that new Brightline station, if that's on the table, right?
Well, that's what we're talking about. The city is looking at expanding it a couple blocks.
To go north.
Now it looks like it's going to be several years before Brightline will consider it. I would rather Brightline go to the airport, because we've already got transit there. They've already got a stop that they can expand their train.
That makes sense to me.
There's a physical problem of going through Malfunction Junction, but engineers are smart and they can figure out solutions. The challenge we have is that before we got Joe Lopano, which I was involved in 2010, our airport was going down. We weren't even in the top 10 list domestically anymore. It was declining rapidly. And and a bunch of us knew we had to turn around our airport. We had lost 60% of our international flights during a 14-year period. We had more international flights in the 80s than we had in 2010. And so we showed the board that it made sense to get rid of the guy who was running it and bring in a new person. Steve Burton was on the board. He was a friend of mine. I worked closely with him as a volunteer to bring in Joe. And when Joe came on board, he had marketing experience, international flight recruitment experience, and he also was in charge of the customer experience at Dallas-Fort Worth. And so we helped bring him on board, but we showed him the kind of a vision for what Tampa Airport could be. And he's brought in lots of international flights now. He's brought in lots of domestic flights. He's improved the customer experience, added local restaurants. He's gone way beyond the things that we wanted. The problem with Brightline or any other high-speed rail that ends in Ybor, imagine that you can take Uber from your house to Ybor, let's say $25, take your family, and then you spend $100 or whatever going round trip on Brightline because it goes all the way to Orlando International Airport. Orlando Airport, because we were asleep at the wheel for years, has more international flights than we do. And it's not because of Disney. We were the original airport for Disney, but we lost that to Orlando because we didn't have marketing people. So imagine if you could take an Uber to that station, then take the high-speed rail to Orlando, and because they have more nonstop flights and it's more competitive, you could save $400 per person on flights. It's worth it to you to spend for an Uber and for the train to save a lot of money by taking the train to theirs. And
people drive on I-4 to go to the Orlando airport already.
But a barrier is that there's a lot of traffic. That's we have what's called a catchment area, and before 2010, the airport refused to even look at the fact that it's called leakage. We were leaking passengers to Orlando and Miami. If you could fly to Latin America faster and cheaper by driving to Miami or taking a bus to Miami, people were doing it. We've been very competitive the last 14 years. I do have a concern about the airport of the people who are on the short list. Great people, very experienced, very good at operations. The one they didn't pick that they dropped out last week is the head of marketing and flight recruitment. The airport can be a nice facility. It can be run very efficiently. It can be the best airport facility in the world. If we don't have flights, it's dead. And so we've got to make sure that we keep our airport competitive. And we need to make sure if Brightline comes here, that we don't let Brightline kill our airport, that we're competitive with Orlando. And ideally, even if it stopped there, it would go onto the airport, because then Tampa Airport could compete with Orlando. If you're going to the beach and then to Universal or Disney, you can fly into Orlando and then drive over here to go to the beach, or you can fly into here, go to the beach, and then take a train over there to go to Disney and Universal.
I mean, it sounds like the ultimate vision would be Brightline connecting through essentially down I-4, 275, all the way to the beaches, across the Howard Franklin, right? Airport, have a stop along the way in Ybor, have a stop in Midtown, have a stop at the airport, and then cross the bridge to Pinellas. It's a long road to get there, though. And it also doesn't solve for the intercity, our network, right? Getting from University to downtown to the airport to South Tampa.
But you start with spines of a system. When I lived in Singapore, they had it like an X. They had two lines. Now, 30 years later, they have spaghetti lines going everywhere, and that's underground and some overground. And one of my friends I went to college with over there, he's been in charge of most of those systems. It's something we can do. The challenge is money. And to get money, we need to have a well-run campaign, and we need to show people how it will benefit them. And that ties into the neighborhood commercial districts, because when you show people outside the spine, for example, there's a CSX line that goes from USF to Port Tampa down at the end of the peninsula. So if you live down in Port Tampa, you could conceivably get on a train, go to downtown, and then go all the way up to USF. Ed Chiranchik back in 1988 ran a simulator called the Regio Sprinter, where they had stops on Howard Avenue and one on Bay to Bay. And it was beautiful. People were very excited about it. At the time, CSX was not willing to sell their line, and we can go down a rabbit hole in that. But if we had that line and we were trying to sell that as part of a system, we would get opposition from people who were not along the line. And so what we have to do is show them if that line was included, I'm just using it as an example, but if that line was included, we'd have to show people, what are we going to do for you? And that's why the neighbor commercial districts are important. When people have been trying to sell these taxes, they talk about transit-oriented development. And they take us to cities like Denver, where you see a train stop and there's buildings all around it. That's the way they sell it, to say, well, the way the city makes back the money is through property taxes and the development. Well, what enlightened cities like Seattle, Singapore, others do is they create what's called transit-ready development. And so now for the first time in our comprehensive plan, we've added neighbor commercial districts. That's creating kind of a neighborhood center, neighborhood town center, where you allow a little bit of density on four corners. And we put a little grocery store, a little coffee shop, other things, so that people can walk and buy eggs instead of driving across town. So we take trips off. But then we need to put a stop there that would be either for bus or rail. And if we don't have the service now, we still put the stop there. Transportation, people call them transportation nodes. So we have a physical infrastructure that the neighborhoods can be proud of, because they help build an identity in the neighborhoods. And there are about 130 places around the city where we could do these. And we're already starting through the CRAs in East Tampa. And so we provide amenities, people provide a sense of identity, and then we put the transit stop, so that when we propose the transit, we say, this center of your neighborhood, we're going to connect you through this transit link. Here are the dots. We've already created the dots, and now we just need to hit the service to link.
Yeah, it's almost like building the fabric, right? You've laid this fabric through the city. You have these little transportation nodes, little community districts, and then when transportation is viable through the funding and through the public will and government and all that, boom, you already have areas to connect. Versus, I think now a lot of people try to force this transit conversation with Brightline or light rail or the trolley. The trolley should go to every neighborhood in the city, which I say all the time, and I totally agree with. The problem with that is the money, right? I hate to say it, but it'll never happen right now. You almost have to you got to put that cart before the horse.
What I think will happen is that, and this is just a hypothetical, but the easy thing is that CSX at a certain point will be willing to sell us that line. I was involved in the Sunrail program over in Orlando, and so I'm aware of that. Was the one that Jeb Bush led years ago. It is possible to get that line. It's going to be very expensive, and then you have to operate it, but it is possible to get that line. But then you've got to show all the pieces that go out it, and maybe eventually there would be some kind of rail. But most likely what would happen is you would, for the majority of the system, 5 or 10 years, hopefully, we'll be able to use these 8 or 10 person autonomous vehicles, and we'll run them in fast headways. And if they're mobile on tires, we can move them quickly.
Right.
And we test the routes. We lower our cost by having them autonomous, and we run them through. We perfect the routes. When Amazon started their delivery system, remember at first a few years ago, they had individuals delivering everything. It was like Uber Eats.
Yeah.
And then suddenly they got their own trucks, and still they're outsourcing some of it. But what they were doing is using the data to study algorithms of how transportation happens. What we need to do is use the autonomous vehicles to test the patterns. Instead of an engineer coming up with the routes, we need to help figure out the patterns that people want to use. Where do they want to go from here to here?
Yeah, Joe Lopano talked about that on this show, where he says maybe technology and the way of transportation is actually beyond our infrastructure. And he was saying Brazil, they don't have a lot of cell towers in Brazil. Wi-Fi was invented after I think it was Brazil, built all that infrastructure. So it's like in some countries with new technology, like with Starlink, maybe in Africa in some places, there will never be large cell towers and all these cable networks for internet, because they'll just implement Starlink. And in the same way with transit, maybe we'll never have rail all over the city like a big trolley network, but we don't need to because of these new technologies.
If you had think about the line that he built from the landside terminal
right
to the rental car facility. That was a very expensive and to some extent controversial, but he said, no, I've got this vision. He was like George Bean. I'm going to focus on this. I'm going to get it done. And it's great. It kept our reputation as an easy access. What was happening before is people get on a bus, which is horrible.
Yeah,
nobody wants to get on a bus to go to a rental car facility.
No.
But if you look at that system, I don't know how it runs exactly, but it looks like it's just a rubber tire trolley on a fixed guideway. And so if you have rubber tire trolleys moving from place to place and smaller ones that run at faster headways, then eventually you could build a fixed guideway for them. So they have a protected lane, and then eventually you could build something else if you wanted to. But autonomous vehicles are going to be, I think, unless we have transporter beams like in Star Trek, it's going to be the technology that will break through with all
Well,
this.
who knows? I mean, I just hope that there's solutions in the future for all this, because I think transit is really a pinch point in this whole conversation about developing the city. And this isn't a next year conversation. This is a multiple decades long conversation. I remember Ed Taranchik's, when he ran for mayor in 2019, he had the GO plan, and the GO plan was all about that CSX line. My thought was, number one, what if CSX would never sell the city the land for whatever reason? And number two, if they know the city wants it so desperately, what if they charge out the ass and then the economics of it get disrupted? Like, how can the city get that rail? Because that would be a huge win, right? To have a South Tampa to downtown all the way north to USF. That's a critical easement.
And there are other lines too. There's a line that connects up through Oldsmore and others. My firm used to work with CSX years ago, and we helped them write the letters to say, no, we're not interested. And so we would have these long conversations with them. And the conditions have changed since then. One is that the old Port Tampa down by McDill has fewer and fewer factories now. So they don't have the need that they used to have cargo going down that way. And so at some point, economically, they're probably going to want to get the capital back.
Yeah.
Even if they wanted to do it, though, and what they have done in other places, that they said, you buy this from us, and then you lease it back to us for free so we can put our freight down it, and then you give us a whole harmless agreement to indemnify us in case one of your trains hits us. And so there are a lot of complications to it. But anyway, if we did that, one of the other things that's going to happen, though, is, remember I mentioned this Tea Party group before. One of the names they use for themselves is no tax for tracks. They really, really dislike railroad tracks. And there are training programs around the country that they participate in that talk about how train tracks are wasteful. And so if that track is part of the expense, if I remember correctly, the one that Jeb Bush helped fund in Orlando was just that segment that they bought was about $900 million 20 years ago. So it's going to be very expensive just to buy the tracks and then to maintain it and provide security and then run the trains. All that's going to be very expensive. And so as policymakers, we're going to have to look at it and see, is it worth the cost? And second, we're going to have to go engage the opposition and say, if we say we're going to build a spine, but we're not going to try to build rail beyond that, we're going to use autonomous vehicles, are you okay with it? Can we have any hybrid, or are you completely against rail? But nobody's even had the conversation with them.
I like it not for the rail. I like it for the space. I like it for the actual, that easement essentially along the Selman and up north. You could even tear the tracks out and do a dedicated lane for autonomous vehicles. You could build up and do a monorail right there. It's an incredible piece of real estate that you can't replicate. And if the city was able to own that, boy, I think it'd be a great investment.
Here's another thing too. You talked about the Bright Line could maybe going across 275, and that would mean Howard Franklin and across. Years ago, Expressway Authority was a client of ours. And during that time, we got with the lobbyists, help get the, this is my private sector hat, we helped get the legislation changed, enabling legislation to allow the Expressway Authority to go into Pinellas and I think maybe also Pasco County. And St. Pete Chamber was very in favor of it because they wanted alternative solutions. Imagine if the expressway somehow could expand all the way from Gandy Boulevard all the way to downtown St. Pete. And then at the same time, you could build some kind of fixed guideway system for BRT or autonomous vehicles or for some kind of rail. So and the thing about the expressway, the other thing that we did at that time is DOT was trying to take away our expressway authority. Our expressway authority is run by a local board. That means that the money collected on tolls here is only spent here. DOT at that time wanted to take the money and spend it in other cities. And we didn't want that. The compromise was they got the I-4 connector, which was supposed to be part of the local system. But the Gandy expansion is part of the local the local system. So the Expressway Authority is very well run and generates a surplus of money, and we could use that to potentially do something as well.
Yeah, that'd be great. They need to use that money for the landscaping too, like right here on Cleveland. Man, along the expressway. We've got to get Greg Slater back on and talk about it, but it's like plant some beautiful flowers and trees. I know it's pricey, but let's make our city beautiful. I want to talk to you. I'll let you run. We've been going on like what? What are we at? 2 hours? Almost 2 hours. Sorry, Bill. One last topic though. I love that you kind of touched on, FDOT takes the money, spends it elsewhere. We talked about some of the relationships between Tampa and Hillsborough County, and then at the state level. I'm kind of getting this feeling in this sense that the surrounding counties, the region, and then there's a state conversation too. Traditionally, in decades past, it seems like Tampa, the city, has been used. It's been used for an employment base. People drive in and out. We have highways running through our urban core, right? People commute through Tampa, like Brandon, Riverview, through Tampa, down to Pinellas. It just seems like Tampa's been used and used and used and used. And then you see this all for transportation thing, right? The city comes out, we vote for a tax increase, and then the county really is the one that kind of shut that down. I think it was 2 select commissioners or 1 guy. But what's your political kind of ideology about the relationship between city and county? This relates to like the trolley, like Tampa may be fully taking over the trolley and dictating our own future with transit. Like, do you understand what I'm alluding to?
Yeah, well, an example, city and county, I want to talk more broadly. Josh Wastel, who I did not know before he got elected, he's been outspoken against the arts. I'm a huge advocate for the arts. I think the arts we've seen in St. Pete, they're inextricably connected to the innovation economy. I've interviewed hundreds pro bono for the EDC in St. Pete. I've interviewed hundreds of tech CEOs. They are in St. Pete because of the arts, not because they can go watch a show, but because their best and brightest people are also artists in their spare time. You cannot hire people at a really high level who don't want to participate in a creative economy. And so I've had very frank conversations with them, and we've debated it back and forth. And I think that's how we solve things, is by having conversations. But the bigger issue you alluded to is the regional issue. And we have a group that formed about 94 called the Tampa Bay Partnership. It actually came out of an idea from the Tampa Chamber, and it was supposed to bring 6 or 8 counties together. It's failed in different iterations. Firstly, they were mostly in charge of several of the ballot initiatives for transportation. They failed. But the thing that we need is to build a conversation among the cities and counties. 4 years ago, the Tampa Chamber changed its name to Tampa Bay Chamber. The Tampa Hillsborough EDC changed their name to Tampa Bay EDC. And I knew, because I spent a lot of time in Clearwater, St. Pete, and other places, I knew exactly how they would react to it. They look at Tampa Bay as a regional brand that everybody owns. It doesn't mean Tampa, it means Tampa Bay. And so they saw that as a land grab. You are now saying you want to take away members from us to put in your organization because you're pretending like you're a regional organization and not just a local organization. And those 2 groups refused to back down and change their names back. That sent shockwaves in the region. At the same time, there was a group, the Tampa Bay Partnership, had helped start, called TBD, which was a group of elected officials in the area that were working toward building a regional plan for transportation. I worked with them for a while too, and helped literally write the plan for transportation vision for 2035. The thing that happened, number one, Tampa Bay Partnership was never able to get funding for TBD, so it failed. And number 2, the individual parties didn't trust each other enough to give up control of certain things, and there was no real leadership to push everything together. Contrast that to Tampa Bay Water, which I also was involved in. Tampa Bay Water was a part of the water wars. Pinellas, Hillsborough, and Pasco were fighting each other over water resources. And to make a long story short, 6 government agencies, Pasco, Pinellas, Hillsborough, Tampa, St. Pete, Newport Richey came together to form a new organization called Tampa Bay Water. And it was essentially a peace agreement, but it also was a collaborative agreement to share water resources. And that happened to be also why your grandfather was mayor, and he helped work with it. But the idea was to bring peace to the region in the water wars. Tampa Bay Water, for the last 20 years, has been one of the best examples in the world of regional cooperation. And it was put together by Ed Transick, Steve Seibert, Jerry Maxwell, who was the executive director. So a Pinellas County Commissioner, Hillsborough County Commissioner, executive director, and many others. But they worked really hard to bring everybody to the table. They personally met with everyone. And we see in cases like Orlando and other folks, when the region comes together, you can be very effective, but it takes strong leadership, collaborative leadership, where people are asking everyone to roll up their sleeves and work together. And we need that on transportation as well.
We do, but also, shouldn't Tampa have the largest seat at the table? Shouldn't Tampa have the most representation, not in terms of population, but in terms of the entire reason for the region? I'm gonna make a T-shirt. Is Tampa the culture, the history, our airport? We're the largest, densest city in the area. Tampa is the reason why the entire region enjoys its economic benefit. A lot shifted over the years.
Go back and look at Tampa's scorecard. On a per capita basis, St. Pete's beating Tampa. On a larger basis, you're right. But if you look at what I tell people is look at the bridges every day. People are not just going in one direction, they're going in both directions. And they're going both directions all day long. Businesses and individuals, for the most part, don't know where the boundaries are. If you are in Tampa and you say, hey, I want to go enjoy the waterfront, you might drive over to the pier in St. Pete. If you're in St. Pete and you say, hey, I want to go smoke a cigar, you go to Ybor. People
Let's
don't
visit
care.
the beaches in Tampa, and then they're in Clearwater, you know?
You can go to the dog park in Davis Island.
Right.
So the point is that people are going in both directions. If you live in Tampa, you bought a house and you're homesteaded and you don't want to sell it, and you get a great job offer in St. Pete, most likely you're going to be driving across the bridge every day.
Right.
It's not that everybody wants to live in Tampa and work in Tampa, and then people are coming back and taking our resource. Yes, they're driving through our regional roads. With the expressway, they're paying toll, by the way, too. But if we look, there's a sharing of resources, and there are more ways that we can collaborate. And if you go back to the structure of leadership, if the Tampa Chamber is meeting with individuals who have constituencies behind them, they should not act like they're the big player at the table. They should be one of everybody. Everybody around the table starts to talk. It doesn't mean you don't advocate for your interests, but you put your interests on the table along with everybody else. That's how you get to a collaborative agreement faster.
Yeah.
And so, yes, we'll go in and we'll push for what Tampa wants, and we'll defend and protect Tampa. But if we listen to everybody else and we treat them like equals, we'll get to a solution much faster.
In regards to transit specifically, though, like on the trolley, it just seems like Hillsborough County isn't really for the trolley. They look at it as a novelty and not viable. Like, why would they spend money on it? We talked a little bit about how those people should be convinced through data and through everything we talked about. It just seems like there's something in the air about how Tampa, unfortunately, doesn't have a say in how the city looks and feels. Like, even with the ferry system, like, we should have some sort of a ferry that goes from the mainland, the Apollo Beach area, up near Gibsonton, to the MacDill Air Force Base. There's a ton of military members that live out in Brandon that have to hop on the roads and clog our roadways just to get to MacDill.
Have you interviewed Ed Transick?
No, not yet.
He's been trying to do that for 10 or more years. You know, originally, and I worked on this too, sorry, but when he proposed the Cross Bay Ferry, originally he proposed 2 boats that would go at 1 hour headways between Tampa and St. Pete. And that was the beta test. If you have 2 boats going at 1 hour headways, you can use it as a commuter service, and then you could extend it to Apollo Beach. The problem is that some of the players wouldn't. The former mayor of Tampa wasn't a regionalist and did not want to collaborate. Rick Kreisman in St. Pete was pushing this, and money was gathered, but it was not enough to provide 2 boats. So what happened is you had 1 boat that went at 2 or 3 hour headways because it had to go round trip, and then it's not useful for commuters. Then it's more of a tourist thing. And every year, I think I haven't worked on it in years, but every year the passenger traffic gets greater and greater. But if they, in the beginning, had the investment to have it a service as a commuter service, then we would have had the McDill service by now.
I think we've had that story on this show 1,000 times. Had we done X or had we invested here, there's almost this, this is going to sound horrible and conservatives are going to hate me, but there's almost like a blank check theory I have. It's a horrible way. You'd never brand it like that, right? But a blank check theory where, look, let's fix the roads. Let's get the ferries going. Let's extend the trolley. Let's do all this now. This shit's only going to get more expensive in the future, and it's going to be 1,000 times more difficult as more property owners come in, property becomes more diverse. The city has an opportunity right now. Let's write the check and pay for it. Borrow the money, get the bonds, do it all. Fix all the roads, extend the trolley. We're talking about a lot of money here. But damn, if we didn't do it 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when are we going to do it? And are we going to wait at a point when there's 500,000, 25%, 50% increase of a population here in the city, and we still haven't done these things? And you're here in 10 years and we're still talking about it.
Well, if you go back during Pamela Maiori was mayor during the Great Recession, and so she had to cut all the budgets. Then we went through this upward cycle where the revenues started getting greater and greater and greater. During that whole period, though, in the boom cycle, the road repair budget was not increased. We should be spending at least $30 million a year on road repair. We were spending $4 million up until 2 years ago. And the reason, I think, is that this mayor and the last mayor were counting on all for transportation to go through, because then they could take that transportation-oriented money and put it on it. But in the meantime, what happened? The roads all over the city got potholes and broke down and were not repaired in the way they should. A year ago, we on city council took away some of the things this mayor had proposed and added to the budget. So it went from $4 million to $11.1 million. And this year it's, I think, closer to 12. But 12 is not 30 million. It's not enough to even fix the repairs in this particular year. And I could go through the Tampa budget even more, but we've got to focus on what we need, not what is nice to have.
Yeah.
Spending $220 million on a new office building that's half empty is not a good idea. Right now we have before us to spend, I think it's $38 million on the Riverwalk, of which the numbers are wrong. There's a federal match and we're spending about 25-30 million on the Riverwalk plus the federal money. And then we're going to bond it. So that's like 50-60 million, something like, for the West Riverwalk. I think we need a West Riverwalk, but if we're only spending $4 million on road repair, we need to take that money and spend it on road repair instead. If we're going to bond some of this, bond road repair, because in the last few years, we've had a lot of young, innovative people with lots of money who have moved here. But what they find is that they pay a lot in property taxes. In other states, you pay a sales tax. Here we pay, or income tax. Here we pay property taxes. And then the sidewalks are falling apart, roads are falling apart, parks are falling apart. Why? Because the budgets have been underfunded for years. And so what I'm trying to do is look at the new form of economic development, which is you have to improve the quality of life where people live, because companies will locate where the innovative workers are. They're not going to go somewhere for the long run with just a subsidy. They're going to come where the people are. And for the people to go there, you need the cultural aspects, the sports, the natural environment, the parks, the decent roads and schools.
A nice place to live for people to stay. And Tom Brady's great, and winning some championships are great, and Gasparilla is really cool. But when the roads don't get fixed and you're paying $35,000 a year in property taxes, and every time you pull out of your driveway, your nice car hits a pothole, you're a little frustrated. And guess what? You don't have to live here.
I get calls like that every day.
People like that will move, and then what the hell are we going to do? I think you're right. I totally agree with you. A Riverwalk is great, and it's probably a good idea, and we should do it, but not at the expense of not fixing the roads and the sidewalks and some of these basic needs the city has.
When the roads are fixed, the sidewalks are fixed, and the parks are fixed, then we should look at other things like that. But until then, same thing. This administration, we were approached by 5 years ago. We city council were approached by people in East Tampa who said there's a park called Fair Oaks in East Tampa, and they told us that it was a fire trap. It hadn't been renovated in years, and it had rats in the roof. And they said the prior mayor had turned down twice $375,000 to renovate it. So we, as the CRA board, held a public meeting there. 100 people showed up. Mayor Castor had a video at the beginning saying, I've already put this $375,000 in the budget, so you don't have to worry, we're going to renovate it. And previously I had proposed $200,000 just to get it started. And people in the audience booed. One, because she wasn't there. Two, because it was only $300,000. They said, now we don't want to renovate it. Now we want a new building. And the building was in terrible shape. So Orlando Goods and I went back and we started talking about $4 or $5 million budget to build a new building. And the neighborhood was very excited about that. Wow, you're going to get us a new building. Remember, the park repair budget for the entire city is $5 million. So to get one park to get $5 million building is unbelievable. A few months later, the mayor's office came back and said, well, we're not going to do that. We've decided to build a regional park, and it's going to cost $18 million. And then a year or two later, they came back and said, well, now that regional park is more expensive than we thought, so now we're going to spend $41 million. And we're going to bond it, which means it actually is going to cost $80 million. And my argument is that you're spending how many times the whole budget of the city for parks in one park. Plus, did you ask the people in East Tampa, would you rather spend $41 million on one park, or would you rather us fix all your parks? Because if you live in East Tampa and you don't live near that park, you don't get the benefit of it. But the attitude of the city was, no, everybody in East Tampa will want to come to this park. Okay, it's a great thing to put on a resume and in a video, but the reality is that there are all these other people that are living around other parks that are falling apart, not just in East Tampa, but South Tampa. If you go to Interbay, which is one of the main areas where kids play baseball, and these are wealthy families, the dugouts were crumbling over kids' heads, causing a hazard. We didn't have any money to fix that, but we have $41 million plus interest, $80 million to spend on one park. That vote was 6-1. I voted against it, not because I don't vote for East Tampa. I supported the $5 million version, but not the 18 or the $41 million version.
How does that work politically in the city of Tampa? The mayor comes up with the directive, we're going to do this badass park for $40 million, however many millions it is, and then the council votes on it, correct? And you have a uneven number of people, so there's always going to be, a winner one way or the other, right? There can't be a tie, and then whatever council decides is what gets moved forward. Like, how does that exactly work?
The only time there's a tie is if somebody's absent, and then we could always have a vote the next week.
Got it. But in that case, it seems like, wouldn't it be very logical to spread that money more thin? Why? I guess it just depends on who's sitting on council.
I did, but
right?
then the mayor's office sent somebody to East Tampa to say, oh, you have to protest Carlson and send him emails because he's against East Tampa. So I had to respond to every single person and say, I'm the one that proposed fixing this in the first place. And they're spending too much money on one park. And once people heard it, they understood. But what happens is that because of sunshine, the 7 of us on council are not allowed to talk to each other outside of the dais. The mayor's office can lobby all my colleagues, and I'm not allowed to know what they think. So we have a meeting tomorrow. I'm going into the meeting. I don't have any idea how they're going to vote on any of those things.
How do you operate like that on city council, going in blind? Why? Well, I know the reason why you wouldn't, because of Florida law, right? Sunshine law. But wouldn't it make sense for a city council to sit in a closed room and debate these things and talk about what their constituents want and don't want and what they've been working on? How do you go into a meeting like this blind, never having talked to another council member? It doesn't make any sense to me.
The state law only allows closed meetings under certain confined circumstances, like dealing with litigation. But then after the litigation, the full minutes of the meeting have to be publicly disclosed.
What about a podcast like this? What if we had you and 2 other members and we talked about a specific issue?
We can't be in the room at the same time. If one of my colleagues,
any member of the public can watch this video and be in the room with us.
Yeah, and I can listen to it afterwards. But the where you break sunshine is if you have a conversation. And so if somebody speaks at a Rotary Club, if somebody else speaks at a Rotary Club and I go sit in the audience and listen, in theory, I could kind of do that as long as I don't ask a question. But somebody could always say, oh, well, he was there, he broke sunshine, so we tend not to go. But the other thing that happens is that a mayor, city council can approve the budget, approve expenditures, approve contracts, and land use, a few other things. The mayor runs all the administration of the city. So all the staff except our aides report to the mayor. Mayor runs everything. So if somebody has a pothole, we can't help somebody get the pothole fixed without going to the mayor's people to ask for help. And so there's an incentive there for everybody to collaborate. And so what happens if you disagree? 4 years ago, we started to disagree, and we were all told that if we wanted to talk to staff, we had to go through the chief of staff's office. So we want a pothole fixed and so we all objected, and within a month or so, they changed that rule. But what a mayor can do is go to a city council member and say, hey, in your district, you wanted to get that new playground set, and that's $50,000. I'll tell you what, I'll put that in as a line item if you vote for me on this other project. It's totally legal to do that. But and I've said this publicly at council meetings, what you're doing if you do that is you're selling your vote. My vote's not for sale. I won't sell it for anything. And what I always say, I dare you not to give South Tampa what South Tampa wants, because South Tampa is very powerful politically. But we need to make sure we cater to every area. But what happens is that they can not only offer goodies, but they can say, hey, how about if I go to a press conference with you and we use the communication team to help promote you, or we'll send out a press release promoting your story to the media about what you're doing. And so there are these freebies that a mayor can offer to incentivize council members to vote the way they want.
And the Sunshine Law only applies to members on a council. It doesn't apply to the mayor or to the office, the staff. That administration is essentially exempt from that law.
Yeah, we used to all do weekly updates with all the staff, and the mayor's political advisor would run them, and we would get briefed, and then we would be asked, well, how do you think you're going to vote on that? And I quickly figured out that they're just counting votes. And so I stopped making the calls. Like, I'm not going to be on a call where you're counting votes, because it's not about, if you're a lobbyist dealing with the legislature, it's about winning or losing the number of votes. In the case of the city, what you have to realize is that we also represent constituents who all have different viewpoints. And we're trying to take the consensus of what people are saying and put it together to vote correctly to represent the constituents. And we all represent different constituents. So what the mayor's office should be doing is getting feedback from us on what we're hearing, and then together, even though it's bilaterally, they would work with us to find solutions that make sense. We've got an issue tomorrow where the mayor's office is at odds with 5 neighborhood associations, 2 business groups, and I think the majority of council. And I've been begging the chief of staff, please don't. We just had 2 horrific storms. This is the second meeting since the storm. The last thing we need to do is have a huge political fight. Please do not allow that to happen. And pretty much they've said, too bad that's what's going to happen.
Jeez. Sounds like a pain in the butt. Do you, there's got to be a level of thinking where you look at all this and go, who would want to do something like this? Like I think my grandfather, talking with him about being in politics, he just enjoys it and he loves people. And when I hear stories like this and I talk to all these different people, it just seems like a job that you're running this uphill battle. There's laws that prohibit you from doing a good job, like that Sunshine Law. And there's great reasons for that law too, right? It's to help bring sunshine to a public process. I hope one day all this changes, and maybe it's through technology. Like maybe in some weird way we could set up a panel and talk about these issues publicly where it wouldn't prohibit a law, where the public could understand, like that park. I bet you if you did a citywide vote, hey, do you want to spend 50 million tax dollars for that city park? It probably wouldn't pass. People would say, I'd rather spend the money to fix the road in front of my house. There's just there, and it's not a Tampa issue. I think it's more broad. It's a really American political issue. There just seems to be a disconnect with members of the public and government, local, state, federal. It's like
the other thing though is, and this is the main message I'd like to leave you with.
Sure.
Is it's really about leadership. Real leaders listen.
Yeah. They
collaborate. You should have a vision. You need a big vision. And if you don't have a vision that people feel uncomfortable with because you're stretching, then don't have a big enough vision. If your vision is to build a new condo in downtown, that's not a big enough vision. We need a vision and we need to get feedback on it. But leadership today is not about going to the 4 older white men. It's not about going to the 10 business groups. It's about building collaboration among the different constituents that can move something forward. And you need to have a certain level of humility to do that, because you're going to get yelled at. People are going to disagree with you, but you have to try to find solutions for that. And you can present an idea, but if the public pushes back, ultimately you have to listen to the public and do what the public wants, because you're there to represent them. And a key thing I want to make sure to say is that I ran into your grandfather a couple years ago at an honorary event for James Tokley, who happened to be one of my professors at UT, but also was the poet laureate. Fantastic person, great poet. And your grandfather said to me, we were talking about politics, and he said, all the city council members knew that my door was always open. They could come talk to me whenever they wanted, and I also would call them. And if there's some kind of disagreement, if people just pick up the phone and have a call or say, come meet me. One of the things you may know, after the last election, this mayor and the last mayor recruited Blake Casper to run against me. And Blake had been a friend, and I was very disappointed that he ran, because I loved his restaurants and supported him, and he had always supported me. But they had him wound up about, they were telling people I was anti-police, which absolutely was not true. And they told him he could easily beat me. And they raised, as far as I could tell, about $850,000. I only raised $150 because he has a lot of rich friends. And we ended up winning 60%. So, number one, that night, Blake called to concede. And I said, hey, let's have coffee and let's reestablish friendship. And the thing I was able to tell him is that, number one, these guys lied to you. And it was obvious that they had. Number two, I didn't run any negative ads against him. And so that was the basis to start collaborating in the community. But the second thing I did, the next day after the election, people said, did Jane call you to congratulate you? Now, she had just run the campaign against me and, raised the money, helped work with it to run a campaign against me. And the thing that someone should do if you're trying to work with everybody is to call them and have a conversation. I didn't get a call. It was about midday. Maybe I would have gotten a call later that day. But one of my friends, who's a wise viewer of the world, said, why don't you call her? And so I did. And I think she was surprised and happy to get the call. And I said, let's get together and have coffee. And we did. And what I said to her is, your vision and my vision are the same. We're going to be here the next 4 years. We can't run against each other. Our reputation is going to be that we worked together and got more done, or that we argued with each other for 4 years. Let's work together. And then I set up a meeting to meet her in her office once a month after that. It's not been 100% great, but it's sure a lot better than not having a line of communication. And so we're continuing to talk.
As a member of the public, I appreciate that, because I think all we do is vote, and we pay attention as much as we can. We have our families and our businesses and our lives, and we vote for people to take care of things for us. So the fact that you're open with all this, and the fact that you're reaching out, to her and to trying to formulate solutions for the people at Tampa, that's all we ask you to do. So thank you, Bill, for that, and thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Being here.
All right, cool. All right, that's it. Wait, quickly tell people too, you're on Tampa City Council, but what you mentioned, there's like different districts. What do you represent?
I'm District 4, which
Okay.
is South Tampa, and it goes like Kennedy and then down Henderson is kind of the easiest way to think about it. So Beach Park is not included, for example.
Got it. But majority of South Tampa is who you represent.
Yeah.
Got it.
But we
Fantastic.
also get calls from throughout the city. And so if somebody from another part of the city calls me, I'm not going to say, oh, you have to go to somebody else.
Okay.
We'll help them. We all help each other.
Got it. Very
and,
cool.
and we show up in each other's districts too. I ask everybody, please come to my district. I want you to understand our issues so you can vote with us.
Well, I think every neighborhood wants different things, but you mentioned it before. We all have that same overarching goal. We want a better place to live for all of us. Yeah. Bill, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All righty. Bye, everyone. See you next week. Hey, guys, if you want to watch episodes just like this one, make sure to click right here to view the rest of our full episodes. And also make sure to subscribe by clicking right here. Thank you for watching.